There are encounters that are hard to talk about, not because of what happened, though that's unsettling enough, but because of how it made the world feel afterward. These are the kinds of experiences that don't leave bruises or break bones. Instead, they linger like fog, reshaping the way someone looks at shadows or silence or stillness. Tonight's first story is one of those. It's not famous, it wasn't covered in newspapers or featured in documentaries, but it was recorded written in a private journal found years later in the attic of a farmhouse in rural Iowa. The entry was dated October 12, 1993. The handwriting was unsteady, almost frantic, as if the author had struggled to find the right words. His name was Marcus Reed, a 41-year-old widower who had lived alone on his family's corn farm since his wife passed in '91. He had no children, no nearby relatives, just the land, the old dog, and his routines. That evening he had gone outside to check on a strange sound. It was nearly 10:30 p.m., the kind of hour when every creak or rustle carries weight. Marcus described the noise as a thin, rhythmic knocking echoing from deep within the corn rows. Not the wind, not an animal, more like a slow tapping against metal. He assumed it might be the loose sheet on the irrigation panel again, the same one that flapped last summer. So he grabbed a flashlight, zipped up his jacket, and walked toward the sound. The path into the cornfield was familiar. He'd taken it 100 times before, even in the dark. But something about that night felt different. The wind had stopped, the air was unusually warm for October, and the usual hum of insects had gone quiet. When he reached the edge of the field, he paused. His dog Wally had followed him partway but refused to step beyond the fence. Marcus didn't think much of it at first. Wally was getting older, slower, but now in retrospect it seemed important. He clicked on his flashlight and stepped between the rows. The noise grew louder as he walked deeper into the stalks. The sound had a tempo, a strange cadence that never changed. Tap tap, pause, tap tap, like a signal or a code. The flashlight beam danced across the stalks, casting long jagged shadows that seemed to breathe. He followed the noise for what he estimated was 3 or 4 minutes. Then the tapping stopped. He stood there in silence, waiting to hear it again. But instead of sound, he noticed something else. Movement, not fast or sudden, just a shift, a shape, maybe 20 feet ahead. His light caught the edge of it, a sliver of something pale and upright in the narrow gap between the corn. Not white like a shirt, more like the underside of a dead fish. No texture, no clothing, just a smooth curved surface reflecting the light. He called out, thinking maybe a kid had wandered onto the property. No answer. He stepped forward, just one row closer, and that's when the shape moved. One slow gliding step to the right, then vanished behind the corn. His instincts screamed, but he didn't run. Instead, he took another step forward, whispering a firm warning. He said if it was a person, they needed to come out now. The beam of his flashlight swayed as his hand trembled. He swept it back and forth across the rows, and there it was again, closer this time. A head, not quite human, too long. The eyes, if they were eyes, reflected light like an animal's, but without blinking. Just 2 dull silver orbs watching, not angry, not curious, just aware. Marcus described the air as changing then, thicker, not hot, not cold, just harder to breathe, like the world was holding its breath. He turned to run, but when he pivoted, there was a sound behind him. Not a growl, not a word, a hum, a steady low vibration that made his teeth hurt and his spine ache. He sprinted back toward the house, flashlight swinging wildly, crashing through the corn without caring about the path. He didn't stop until he hit the porch steps. Wally was gone. The door was wide open. Inside, everything looked untouched. No signs of forced entry, no damage. But something had changed. Every clock in the house was frozen at 10:47, even the one that ran on batteries, and the refrigerator light, which had been out for years, flickered on as he stood there. He slept in the living room that night, lights on, shotgun by his side, but nothing came. No footprints, no broken stalks, just silence. Over the next few days, he tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was stress, maybe the clocks had glitched during a power flicker, but something stayed wrong. The dog never came back. Birds stopped landing on the porch, and every night at exactly 10:47, the hallway light flickered. even though the bulb had been unscrewed. Marcus didn't tell anyone. The journal entry wasn't discovered until 2004, when the property was purchased by a couple from Minnesota looking to start a vineyard. They found the journal in a sealed cardboard box marked tax records. Most of it was mundane: receipts, weather logs, crop yield notes. But that one entry stood out, written over 8 crumpled pages, the ink smudged in places as if written in a rush. The new owners never saw anything strange, but every dog they brought to the property refused to go near the cornfield, and every year on October 12th, the hallway light in the main house flickers, just once, right at 10:47. No one has been able to explain it. When your mind feels heavy again, remember this place. Subscribe, so you can return to the calm once more. Part 2. The reflection in cabin 6. Some stories slip through the cracks, not because they're hard to find, but because the people who lived through them never wanted to tell them in the first place. Not every mystery announces itself with headlines or missing person reports. Some stay buried in the minds of those who saw something they weren't supposed to see, until time loosens the silence, just enough for the truth to surface. This is one of those stories. It came to light through a letter, postmarked 1998, found tucked between the pages of a used paperback in a donation box at a retirement home in Oregon. No return address, just a worn envelope containing 7 pages, handwritten in blue ink, signed only with the name Carla. There's no way to confirm what she wrote, but when you read it slowly, carefully, it doesn't feel like a story. It feels like a memory, stitched together with someone's last attempt to be believed. Carla had worked as a seasonal maintenance assistant at a summer camp in the Sierra Nevadas in the mid-1980s. The camp, she said, wasn't famous or flashy, just a modest family-run site with 7 wooden cabins, a mess hall, and a lake that reflected the sky so clearly it looked painted. Each summer, she helped repair fences, clean gutters, and do odd jobs around the campgrounds while the counselors handled the kids. She'd started working there in 1984, when she was 19, and returned every summer for 4 years. Nothing strange had ever happened, until the final season, in 1987, during a late August session when most of the campers had gone home. That week was a quiet one. Only a handful of kids remained, mostly children of staff who had stayed behind to help shut things down before fall. Carla was in charge of winterizing the cabins, draining pipes, sealing windows, and checking for pest damage. On the afternoon of August 27th, she was assigned to cabin 6, the one closest to the tree line. It had always been a little colder than the others, she said, maybe because of the shade or the way the wind hit that part of the hill, but she'd never felt uneasy in it. Until then, she remembered the moment she walked in. The air was different, not cold exactly, but heavier, as if the cabin hadn't been opened in years, not days. Dust motes floated thick in the slanting light from the windows. The beds were stripped, the floor swept, just like every other cabin. But the mirror over the dresser was wrong. Not broken, not warped, just wrong. It showed the room clearly, but not her, not fully. When she walked past it, her shape appeared, but it lagged behind, just slightly. And when she stopped, the reflection kept moving, for just a fraction of a second, before catching up. She laughed it off at first. Old glass maybe, a trick of the light. She wiped it down, tapped it lightly. But the glass didn't give the way mirrors usually do. It felt solid, like touching a cold wall. Then something flickered in the corner of the reflection on the opposite side of the cabin. A shadow, too tall to be a child, too narrow to be a person. When she turned to look, there was nothing there. But in the mirror, the shadow remained, now standing just behind her, indistinct and pulsing faintly at the edges, like a figure seen through water. She didn't scream. She just walked backward out of the cabin, her eyes never leaving the mirror. As soon as she stepped outside, the weight lifted. The air felt normal again. She told herself it was exhaustion, dehydration, a prank maybe. But something inside her said not to go back in, so she didn't, not alone. Later that day, she returned with Greg, the camp's head groundskeeper. He was in his 50s, ex-army, not the type to scare easily. She didn't tell him everything, just said she felt weird in the cabin, wanted a second pair of eyes. When they walked in together, everything looked normal. The air felt stale, but not heavy. The mirror reflected them both perfectly. Carla felt ridiculous. Greg shrugged, gave her a pat on the shoulder, and left. But she stayed. Something about it still felt off. She sat on the lower bunk for a while, just watching the mirror. At first, nothing happened. Then as the sun began to dip behind the trees, the light in the cabin changed. Shadows stretched across the floor, and in the mirror, Carla saw herself, and something else. A second shape, still, upright, standing exactly where Greg had been before. But this time, it wasn't Greg. It had no features, just a vaguely human outline, darker than shadow, darker than night. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It just stood there, behind her reflection, where no one should have been. Her real body didn't feel cold, but the reflection began to frost over, a ring of condensation blooming around the edges of the mirror. And then, the thing in the reflection turned its head. Carla wrote that she didn't move. She couldn't. Her body was locked, frozen by something older than fear. The thing in the mirror leaned forward, not fast, not aggressive, just slowly, as if studying her. The frost spread inward from the corners of the mirror, blurring everything except that dark, faceless shape. And then, all at once, the glass shattered, not loudly, but silently, as if the sound had been swallowed. Pieces of the mirror hit the floor, but when she looked down, there was nothing there. No shards, no frame. The mirror was gone. Cabin 6 was closed early that season. The official story was water damage from a leaking roof. It remained boarded up for the next 2 summers, and then the camp changed hands. Carla never went back. She never told anyone the full story, not her co-workers, not her parents, not until that letter, written over a decade later. She ended the last page with a single line. "I don't know what I saw, but it saw me too, and I think sometimes it still does. There's no way to verify it. No mirror left to examine, but the current camp staff, different owners, different name, still avoid cabin 6 after sundown. And the kids, even now, say they sometimes see someone standing in the window, not during the day, only when the sky is dark and the lake reflects no stars." Part 3. The man in the fog. Some places seem to hold their breath, not because of anything that can be seen or measured, but because of what they remember. There are roads like that, long, unlit stretches of 2-lane blacktop, where the trees press close on either side and the mist rolls in without warning. Roads that carry more than just cars, roads that remember who passed through and who didn't. This story was pieced together from multiple sources: a police report filed in October 2002, a voicemail recovered from an old answering machine, and the final forum post from a user named Vellum13, whose account was deleted days after publishing it. On their own, none of these pieces would seem particularly unusual, but lined up side by side, they tell the story of something that happened on Route 117, near a decommissioned railway line in northern Pennsylvania. Something that changed a man's life forever, or ended it, depending on who you believe. The man's name was Daniel Whitlock, 34 years old, a long-haul trucker with no criminal record, no history of mental illness, no indication that he was anything other than ordinary. According to the dispatch log, Daniel placed a call to his boss at 2:11 a.m. while en route to deliver agricultural supplies to a co-op outside Scranton. His voice was calm, maybe a little tired. He said he was pulling over due to heavy fog. The last words on the voicemail were, "I'm just gonna wait it out. There's someone else on the road too. Walking, I think, but I can't quite tell. Looks like he needs help." The call cut off. No panic, no urgency, just observation. When Daniel failed to arrive at his destination by morning, the company assumed he'd pulled off somewhere to rest and overslept. It wasn't until that afternoon, when GPS data showed his truck hadn't moved in over 12 hours, that they contacted local authorities. A sheriff's deputy was dispatched to the coordinates. The vehicle was found parked on the side of Route 117, engine cold, driver's side door ajar. No sign of Daniel. The fog had long since lifted, but the road still felt wrong. That's how the deputy described it in his statement. Like walking into someone else's dream. Inside the cab, everything looked untouched. Wallet on the dash, thermos in the cup holder. No signs of struggle. Just one strange detail. The windshield was fogged from the inside. as if someone had been breathing heavily against the glass for hours. But the seat was dry, no body heat, no moisture, no prints. The strangest clue came 3 days later, when Daniel's brother Jeremy accessed his home computer to look for recent communications. In his email drafts was a message, timestamped at 2:46 a.m. 35 minutes after his last voicemail. The draft was never sent. It read, "I don't think he has a face. Not really. I thought it was a man at first, middle-aged, wearing an old coat. But when I blinked, it changed. His head tilted, like he was listening. But there was nothing. No breath, no noise, just the fog and the sound of my heart in my ears. I don't think he came from the woods. I think he's made of them." The rest of the message was gibberish, letters and symbols typed in a rush, the kind of thing you see when someone's fingers slip across the keys. But the spacing looked deliberate. Some of the jumbled phrases repeated, "too tall and no feet on the ground." The family shared the email with the sheriff's office, who included it in their missing person file. Nothing ever came of it. But 2 years later, a post appeared on a fringe paranormal forum. The user, Vellum13, claimed to be a different trucker who had once seen something similar on the same road. He described it in great detail, a figure half seen through the fog, walking steadily down the center line of the highway. At first it looked like a man, but the closer it got, the less certain he became. The arms were too long, the legs didn't bend correctly, and the head, if it was a head, turned too far, rotating in a way that didn't make sense, like an owl watching prey. The man stopped his truck. The figure paused too. For a moment they just stared at each other, and then the fog thickened, unnaturally fast, as if pulled inward by the thing itself. The trucker floored the gas and didn't stop for 80 miles. The post ended with this line, "I'm not saying it was the same thing, but I don't drive that route anymore, and I sleep with my curtains closed, just in case." Daniel Whitlock was never found. His case remains open, listed as a voluntary disappearance, though no activity ever appeared on his bank accounts or identification after that night. But Route 117 still sees reports, not often, just once or twice a year. Drivers reporting someone in the road, too pale, too still. Sometimes they stop, sometimes they drive through the mist and see nothing. But always, afterward, they describe the same feeling, an emptiness that follows them, like something watching just outside the edges of their headlights, something waiting, not chasing, not hunting, just waiting for someone to stop. Sometimes it's not what you see that changes you, it's what sees you back. Part 4. The Children Who Spoke in Unison. It was early November, in a place where the cold sets in quickly, and the wind carries with it the smell of earth and rust. A small, nearly forgotten town in rural Idaho, hemmed in by forest and sky, population just under 500. The kind of place where stories spread quickly, but not far, where most things that happen stay tucked between the hills and the timber, passed down through half-spoken warnings or nervous laughter at the diner. But there's one story that never made it to the newspapers, one that wasn't passed down in any neat, comfortable way. It was written down once on a yellow legal pad, found in the back of a church filing cabinet after a roof collapsed during the winter of 2009. The paper was faded, the ink smeared in places. It had no author's name, no date, but it began with a line that set the tone for everything that followed. They came after the frost, and they did not blink. The events described happened in 1995, near the edge of town where the woods thicken and the satellite signal begins to stutter. At the time, the local elementary school was still open, just one building with 3 teachers, a gravel parking lot, and a playground ringed by pine. That year, 2 new students arrived mid-term, a boy and a girl, no last names given, no paperwork filed. According to the principal's notes, found decades later in the same drawer as the letter, the children were simply dropped off. A truck pulled up early one morning, older model, missing plates. The driver never exited. The kids got out. The truck drove away. The boy was pale and quiet. The girl had a long scar down one side of her neck that no one ever explained. They were dressed neatly, in clothing that looked slightly out of time, wool coats with brass buttons, shoes that had clearly never touched mud. But the most unsettling thing wasn't how they looked, it was how they acted. They never spoke unless spoken to, and even then, their responses were short, polite, precise, but never emotional. and whenever they were addressed at the same time, they would answer together in perfect synchronization, not like twins finishing each other's sentences, more like two instruments tuned to the exact same frequency. Their voices didn't echo, they matched, word for word, down to the pauses. At first the teachers thought it was a game, some form of twin behavior perhaps, but they weren't twins, they didn't look alike. Their birth dates, when finally registered weeks later, were 4 years apart. The school counselor tried to separate them during recess, to encourage independence, but it didn't matter. The behavior continued. They never showed emotion, never got upset, never laughed, just observed. The other children didn't like to be around them, not out of cruelty, just instinct. Animals avoid things that feel unnatural. They'd shift seats to stay further away. They wouldn't touch the swings after the pair used them. And in class, if either child raised a hand, the room would go silent, every time. Then came the drawings. Each week, the younger grades were asked to draw a picture of something that made them happy. Most of the kids filled their papers with trees, pets, cartoons, but the new students always drew the same thing, something tall, black, with elongated arms and no face. In every drawing it hovered above a house. Sometimes the house was on fire, sometimes the windows were dark, but always the figure loomed above it, as if watching or waiting. The art teacher, an older woman named Mrs. Calvert, kept the drawings in a folder, unsure whether to report it. She finally did, weeks later, after one of the children added a strange detail to their work, a series of tiny, precise symbols carved into the figure's chest. She didn't recognize them, but something about them felt wrong, almost familiar, like something remembered from a bad dream. Then came the night of the storm. The town was hit by a sudden freeze, unexpected, sharp and violent. Power went out across the region. Roads iced over in minutes. Most families hunkered down, but not everyone stayed home. One of the school's janitors, Mr. Kellner, lived on site in the caretaker's apartment behind the gym. He was known to keep watch during storms, making sure the pipes didn't burst. That night, he claimed to hear something moving through the halls around 2 a.m. Soft footsteps, like bare feet on tile. Thinking it was a break-in, he grabbed his flashlight and followed the noise. What he saw, according to a written statement found folded into the back of his old Bible, was the children, standing at the end of the hall near the principal's office, not dressed for the weather, just standing, side by side, staring at the wall. When he called out to them, they turned, not fast, not slow, and they spoke, together, not in greeting, not in explanation, but in one sentence, repeated 3 times. "He is behind the glass." Mr. Kellner said the air around them felt strange too still. He felt like his heart was beating too loud. He stepped closer, and the girl reached out, not to him, but to the trophy case beside her. She pressed her hand to the glass, then she smiled. He said it was the only time he ever saw her do that. The boy didn't move, just stood, staring at his reflection. Then they both turned and walked down the hall, disappearing around the corner. When he followed, they were gone, doors still locked. No footprints in the fresh frost that had blown in through the broken gym window. The next morning, the school remained closed due to ice. When staff returned, cabin 3, the old portable used for storage, had been broken into, not ransacked, just entered. In the center of the room was a circle drawn in salt, candles placed at 5 points. No one claimed responsibility. No fingerprints were found. But inside the desk drawer was a single page torn from one of the students' notebooks. A note, written in that same precise mirrored handwriting used in the class assignments. It read, "They listen through the lights. They wait when you sleep. They are not finished." The children were withdrawn from the school later that week. Another unmarked truck, another silent goodbye. The staff were told it was a family emergency. No forwarding address, no explanation, and no one from the district ever followed up. But here's the thing, every winter since, during the first hard frost of November, the school's hallway motion sensors go off in the night. The security footage shows nothing, just flickering lights. But twice, just as the cameras cut out, the faint sound of children can be heard speaking softly, together, in perfect unison. Part 5. The Pale Woman by the Drainage Ditch. There's a stretch of land in eastern Kentucky where the trees grow too close to the road and the hills seem to lean in, almost as if they're listening. The towns scattered along those roads are small, most of them no more than a gas station, a diner, and a post office that still closes at noon on Saturdays. People keep to themselves there, not out of coldness, but tradition. You don't ask too many questions, and you don't talk about things that make the world feel unstable, especially not the things that happen after dark. But one story kept surfacing, over and over again, told in fragments and whispers by truckers, hikers, and the unlucky few who lived near the bend in the old mining road just south of Beckley Hollow. A place where the air feels strange, even in daylight, where the birds fall silent for no reason. They call it the ditch, and the stories all start the same way. I saw a woman down there, and she was too pale to be real. The first documented report came from a highway maintenance worker named Ellis Gordon in 1991. He'd been inspecting runoff systems after a week of heavy rain had caused minor flooding across the county. His route took him along the old coal road, one mostly used now by logging trucks and the occasional lost tourist. Around 4:30 in the afternoon, as the light began to dim behind the ridge, he pulled over to check a drainage ditch that had overflowed the night before. It wasn't supposed to be part of his route, but something drew his attention to it. He never said exactly what, just that it felt like the trees had leaned out of the way so I'd see it. The ditch was shallow, lined with moss and broken branches, with water trickling along the base. Nothing unusual. But as he walked toward it, he noticed a shape just beyond the bend, a figure kneeling at the edge of the ditch, long hair hanging down, unmoving. He assumed it was a woman, maybe injured, maybe lost. He called out but got no response. He tried again, louder, still nothing. That's when the air changed. He described it as a kind of compression. Not colder, not hotter, just heavier, as if something was pushing down on the space around him. The trees stopped swaying. The water in the ditch stopped moving. Even the insects went quiet. He stepped forward slowly, careful not to spook her. But as he got closer, he realized something was wrong. She wasn't kneeling. She was crouching, feet flat on the ground, knees bent sharp, hands pressed into the mud like a sprinter waiting for the starting gun. Her skin was pale, not just light, but drained, like the color had been vacuumed out of her. Her fingers were too long, too thin, and her hair, while long and dark, looked damp, even though there hadn't been rain for over a day. When he was maybe 10 feet away, she moved, but not like a person, not with surprise or alarm. She turned her head, slowly, smoothly, until her face was tilted toward him. No pupils, no whites, just dark, featureless sockets that went too far back into her skull. And her mouth, he said, didn't smile. It opened, wide, far wider than it should have, like a hinge that had come unlatched. And then she spoke, only one word. It was his name, Ellis. He ran. He didn't remember turning, didn't remember climbing back up the embankment, just the sound of his boots on wet gravel and the pounding of his own heart. He didn't stop until he reached the truck. When he turned back, the ditch was empty. He never told anyone, not officially, but his sister, a nurse named Teresa, said he woke up screaming for months afterward. Said he kept the lights on all night, even slept in his boots. And a few weeks later, he quit his job, sold his house, and moved 3 counties away. Never explained why. But the story didn't end with him. 3 years later, in the winter of '94, a teenager named Chelsea McBride vanished while walking home from a friend's house just half a mile from the same ditch. Her footprints were found along the road, steady, deliberate, and then nothing. As if she'd stepped into air, no signs of struggle, no broken branches, no blood, just an empty trail that ended near the gravel shoulder. Her body was never found. Her younger brother, Evan, was only 10 at the time. He didn't speak for weeks after she disappeared. When he finally did, he told his parents that she had been calling to him from the woods, not yelling, just calling, softly, repeating his name the way she always did when they were little. But the voice came from the wrong direction, not from the trail or the trees, but from beneath them, low and buried, like it came through the ground. Years later, Evan confessed to a friend that he'd gone looking for her the night she disappeared. He'd crept out while his parents were asleep and followed the road toward the bend. He didn't make it far. Just past the first curve, he said he saw a shape standing by the drainage ditch. A woman, tall, motionless, facing away. Her skin was pale in the moonlight. Her arms hung too long, as if they were being pulled down by invisible weights. She didn't speak, but he felt something in his chest. Tightness, pressure, like he was being drawn forward. It wasn't fear, it wasn't curiosity, it was compulsion. He took one step, then another, and that's when he heard a whisper, right in his ear, though no one was near him. "Not for you, not yet." He ran. By the time he was 16, Evan had moved out of state to live with his aunt. He never went back. Over the years, more reports surfaced, always similar. A woman seen kneeling or crouching by the ditch, always pale, always silent. Unless she spoke the name of the person watching her, she never approached, never chased, just watched, waited. One account from 2001 involved a college student driving back to campus late at night after visiting family. He pulled over to check his tires, which had started vibrating for no apparent reason. As he crouched near the front wheel, he saw her standing in the ditch across the road, hands folded, head tilted. She was so still that at first he thought it was a statue, then her head moved, following him. He got in the car and drove without checking the tire. When he stopped an hour later at a gas station, the vibration was gone, but smeared across the rear window was a single word, written in long wet strokes: "Why?" There were no signs of rain that night, no mud, and he hadn't left the car since. The stories have slowed in recent years, maybe because people avoid that stretch of road, maybe because those who see her no longer talk about it. But every so often, during a quiet winter, the locals still leave flowers near the ditch, not because anyone asked them to, not because they believe in ghosts, but because some things are older than belief, and some places remember what they've taken. The woman hasn't moved from her spot, and no one knows if she ever will. Part 6. The radio tower in the clearing. There are places on the map that don't show up on GPS, not because they don't exist, but because no one ever bothers to mark them. They're leftovers, abandoned buildings, forgotten clearings, fragments of infrastructure built decades ago for reasons that have since faded from memory. But just because something is forgotten doesn't mean it's empty. Sometimes it just means no one has come close enough to disturb what waits inside. This story begins in the Appalachian foothills, just outside a town called Bramble Ridge. The town isn't much, some brick buildings half swallowed by kudzu, a few houses scattered among the trees, and a two-pump gas station with faded stickers peeling off the freezer door. It's the kind of place where people don't move in. They either grow up there or drive through it without slowing down. But about 7 miles past the town limits, off a dirt service road that winds like a spine through the hills, there's a clearing. And in that clearing stands a tower, rusted, skeletal, maybe 80 feet tall, topped with a radio antenna that hasn't broadcast anything in decades. Or at least that's what the official records say. Back in the fall of 2007, a college student named Liam Carter came through the area on a photography assignment. He was traveling alone, gathering images of abandoned structures across rural America. Old mills, defunct power substations, forgotten barns. He was the kind of student who liked to get permission when possible, but he also had a habit of sneaking past fences when curiosity got the better of him. According to his journal, he first spotted the tower on a topographical map in the local historical archive, marked only as Signal Point 4D, with no further description, no record of maintenance, no listed owner. That intrigued him. He made his way there on a grey October morning. The road was overgrown but passable, the kind that looks like it shouldn't lead anywhere until suddenly it does. The forest opened into a wide circular space, maybe the size of a football field. No birdsong, no wind, just stillness. And at the center, the tower. It wasn't impressive at first glance, just a rusted frame streaked with years of rain, wires dangling from its joints like veins. But Liam wrote that something about it felt wrong, not threatening, just out of place, like it was built by someone who didn't quite understand how towers were supposed to look. The proportions were slightly off, the legs curved inward at odd angles, and near the base was a concrete structure the size of a shed, windowless with a door that had been padlocked shut at some point, though the chain had long since rusted away. He spent most of the afternoon taking photos, circling the site, documenting the strange symbols painted along the base of the tower, shapes he assumed were graffiti, though they didn't match any tagging styles he knew. More like stencils, repeated symbols, circles within circles, thin arrows pointing up into nothing. As the light began to fade, he set up camp near the edge of the clearing. He wasn't worried, he'd done this dozens of times before. Remote camping didn't bother him, but around midnight he wrote, the air shifted. He woke to a low hum, not loud but deep, like something vibrating through the ground itself. He thought it might be wind resonating through the tower frame, but the trees weren't moving. The hum came in short bursts, like a slow heartbeat. He stepped out of the tent, camera slung over his shoulder, flashlight in hand. The light from the tower's base was faint but real, just a soft pulse, like a machine powering up after years of rest. He walked closer. That's when he noticed the door to the concrete shed was open. Not wide, just cracked, enough for a sliver of light to spill out. He didn't remember hearing it open. There had been no sound of metal shifting, no click of hinges, but there it was. Inside, the space was smaller than expected. Bare walls, dust, a metal table in the center. On the table, a radio receiver, ancient, bulky, with knobs faded by age. It was on, not loud, just emitting a steady series of beeps. Liam recognized the pattern. Morse code. He didn't know how to read it, but he recorded the audio anyway, figuring he could decode it later. He never got the chance. The next entries in the journal become erratic, frantic handwriting, shorter sentences, fragments of thoughts written at odd angles. One page just says, "There was something in the trees, no footsteps, no eyes, but I felt it watching." Another entry reads, "I heard my name, not once, over and over, through the radio, but wrong, like it wasn't asking for me, like it was warning someone else." He left the clearing before dawn. No sleep, no breakfast. He didn't even pack up his tent, just threw everything into his car and drove. That should have been the end, but it wasn't. Back on campus, Liam tried to play the audio he'd recorded, but the file was corrupted. Every time he opened it, his laptop froze. When he tried to copy the file, the system crashed. Eventually, he gave up and sent the recorder itself to a friend in the audio engineering department. The friend, who later gave an anonymous interview to a paranormal research group, said that the file was blank. No audio, no data, just a single string of characters embedded in the file's metadata. Signal accepted. Liam withdrew from school 2 weeks later. He stopped answering calls, moved in with his sister across the state line. According to her, he barely spoke after that, barely slept. He'd stare at the sky for hours, flinching whenever the wind blew through power lines. He never said what happened that night, just one sentence, repeated once in a whisper when she pressed him. "They're not from above, they come from between." In 2012, the tower was removed by a private contractor. No one knows who hired them. Local officials denied any involvement. No permit was filed. No work order exists. Just one day, the clearing was empty. But those who lived nearby said that, during the nights leading up to its removal, they began hearing strange bursts of static on their radios, old analog sets, CBs, even baby monitors, always at the same time. 2:44 a.m. The signal would fade in, yes, then whisper something just beyond recognition. A voice, a pulse, and then silence. Now nothing remains of the tower, not even the concrete foundation, just a circle in the earth where nothing grows. The moss won't spread there, animals won't cross it, and when the wind moves through the trees, it never touches the center. People don't talk about it anymore, but every so often, a hiker or a hunter finds their GPS shorting out near that bend in the road. The signal drops, the compass spins, and for a brief moment, they hear a hum, deep and steady, rising from somewhere far below the forest floor. Part 7. The passenger beneath the ice. Long before something becomes a legend, it begins as an event, quiet, unannounced, witnessed by only one or two unlucky souls. The telling comes later, shaped by fear and memory. But the moment itself, the thing that truly happened, is often small. A sound, a shadow, a shape half seen, and in some rare cases, a presence that doesn't vanish when morning comes. This story is one of those. A single encounter stretched thin across a long night, told only once and never again. But the details were preserved in a weather journal found inside an emergency shelter near the Arctic Circle, pages warped with ice, ink faded but legible. The entries were dated January 1962, written by a man named Cole Hartwell, a geologist assigned to a short-term solo expedition on Ellesmere Island. The shelter was small, just enough room for a cot, a wood stove, a fold-down desk, and several crates of preserved food. It sat in the shadow of a glacier ridge, placed there by the Canadian Geological Survey for temporary occupation during soil analysis missions. According to the records, Cole was supposed to be there for 7 days. He arrived on the morning of January 3rd and was last heard from on the 6th. A scheduled supply flight found the shelter abandoned on the 9th. No footprints in the snow, no sign of a struggle, just the journal left behind on the desk, frozen open to the final page. Cole's first few entries were normal, dry, methodical. Descriptions of rock layers, mineral density, barometric pressure. He wrote like a scientist, focused, precise. But by the entry on January 5th, the tone began to shift. He wrote about the ice, not the cold itself, which he was used to, but the way the glacier moved, the cracking and groaning of pressure release. He said it sounded like voices, low, distant, always just on the edge of comprehension. He tried to laugh it off in the journal, probably just me being alone too long, he wrote. But that same entry also described something more unsettling. A dark line forming beneath the ice near the western ridge. A fracture, maybe, or something caught in the glacier. At first he assumed it was debris, a branch, a section of rock, but it was too uniform, too symmetrical, and it seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at it. On the morning of the 6th, Cole ventured out to examine the shape more closely. He didn't bring a chisel or any tools, just a notebook, a thermos of coffee, and a pair of binoculars. The entry for that afternoon is fragmented, the handwriting uneven. It reads, "It's not ice, or rather it is, but something is in it. I saw fingers, I swear I did. Not reaching, just suspended, like a mannequin, like it was frozen mid-fall, head tilted back, no eyes, just dark holes, and something beneath it, movement, like breath caught in the ice." That was the last full entry. The following page contains only a single line, written in capital letters across the bottom margin. "I am not alone here." According to the investigation that followed, the shelter showed no signs of forced entry. The stove had gone out, but not due to fuel shortage. Someone had extinguished it. The sleeping bag was still rolled, untouched, but the door had been left open, just slightly, enough for the snow to drift inward in a soft line that ended 2 feet into the cabin. The journal was found upright, pages unblown despite the wind, and behind the shelter, carved into the snow in a perfect oval, was a hollow depression, human-shaped, as if someone had lain down in the snow without sinking. No footprints, no handprints, no drag marks, just the imprint. The rescuers marked the location, collected the journal, and sealed the shelter for future analysis. But when a second team returned in the spring, the glacier had shifted. The ridge where Cole had seen the figure had collapsed. No sign of the dark shape remained, but that wasn't the end of it. Over the next 2 decades, at least 3 other expeditions reported similar phenomena near the same region: unexplained shadows beneath the ice, subtle vibrations in the shelter walls at night, dreams filled with static and whispering. In one report from 1983, a researcher claimed to have recorded intermittent knocking from beneath the floor of their shelter, always between 2 and 3 a.m. Though the structure sat atop solid permafrost with no known hollow spaces, they eventually cut their expedition short. The incident with Cole Hartwell was never officially closed. He was presumed lost to exposure or an icefall, but the more one looks at the details, the harder that becomes to accept. There were no signs of trauma, no tracks, no evidence that he wandered away, and no reason for the strange writing at the end of his journal, unless something truly happened out there in the cold, something that watched him through the ice and waited for him to look back. Some researchers have suggested the phenomenon might be a form of polar mirage, a trick of temperature and light bending reality into phantoms. Others believe it's a form of ice entrapment hallucination, brought on by isolation and sensory deprivation. But those who've been there, the ones who've stood on that ancient groaning ice, don't speak of tricks, they speak of presence. There is something beneath the glacier, something deep, something patient, something that may not move in the way we understand movement, that may not sleep or rot or melt, something that has waited for centuries in silence and stillness. And once, just once, it may have reached the surface, just long enough to see, just long enough to be seen. Part 8. The tape that wasn't recorded in 1974. A man named Raymond Decker moved into a small apartment above an old pharmacy in Cincinnati, Ohio. The building had once been a boarding house, long before the city grew upward and outward, and the second floor still bore the marks of its past: narrow hallways, warped floorboards, doorways that opened into empty space or sealed closets. Raymond was in his early 40s then, a radio technician who had been recently laid off from a local station after automation made his position redundant. He was soft-spoken, solitary, and mostly kept to himself. The neighbors remembered him as polite, if a bit peculiar. He smoked only in the evenings, read old science fiction paperbacks from the library, and spent long hours tinkering with reel-to-reel machines and strange little transceivers in his one-bedroom flat. Raymond never married, no siblings. His parents had passed when he was in his 20s, so when his apartment was eventually cleared out years later, no one claimed the boxes that remained. Among them were stacks of electrical schematics, a stack of reel-to-reel tapes, and a single spiral notebook, wrapped in an oil-stained rag. That notebook now sits in a private collection, passed from one archivist to another like a cursed artifact, never displayed, only read. Its contents have been transcribed only once, and even then, large portions were blacked out or labeled simply as unintelligible. But the story it tells is strange and precise, and whether it is a hallucination, a confession, or something far less explainable, it deserves to be told as it was written. Raymond began his notes in March of '75. The same month a shortwave anomaly was reported across the Midwest. Dozens of hobbyists picked up a strange frequency that burst through the 1.8 MHz band white noise that pulsed with an irregular beat, like a failing heartbeat submerged underwater. It lasted less than 10 seconds, but what made it unusual was how it cut through every station, every frequency at once. It was heard simultaneously on CB radios, handsets, and even televisions, and then it was gone. Raymond believed the signal was deliberate. In his notebook, he described how he began staying up late, scanning the bands not for voices but for the static itself. He claimed there were patterns, not words but shapes. Clusters of pulses that mimicked speech but lacked rhythm, as if something was trying to talk without lungs or language. He began cataloging them, notating each burst with a date and a name. The names weren't proper nouns, they were descriptive. The shiver, the collapse, the mouth. He claimed the signals changed slightly when he played them back through different machines. Analog made them softer, digital made them louder. But one night, something new arrived. The entry is dated May 11th, 2:46 a.m. He wrote, "There was no pulse tonight, no static, just silence." Then a voice, not mine, not human. It was inside the machine, but the reels weren't spinning. I didn't record it, I know I didn't. The tape was blank, but the voice was there whispering through the playback head. It said my name, once. Then it asked a question I didn't understand. Something like, "How long will you keep us inside?" He tried to record it the next night, and the next, but nothing came. The voice didn't return, until it did. On May 14th, the notebook entry was shorter, more frantic. It's speaking again, not through the reels, through the speakers directly. They're not plugged in. No power, but they're vibrating. The signal is piggybacking on something else, maybe electricity itself. I unplugged everything, still it came. I said stop, and it did. But then it laughed, not like a person, like an echo being strangled. He kept trying to isolate it, built filters, looped frequencies, buried himself in diagrams and makeshift amplifiers. He wasn't trying to stop it anymore, he was trying to understand, to communicate. One entry mentions a device he built, 2 magnetized copper plates, connected by an insulated wire and suspended in a water-filled glass jar. He called it a resonance trap. According to his notes, when he placed it near the speaker that had first played the voice, it began to hum on its own. Not just buzz, but produce a tone, high, low, then harmonics. Like a chord played by something without fingers. He claimed the water in the jar began to bubble when the tone peaked. And once the glass cracked. The notebook describes how he would sit for hours in front of the machine asking questions. Not out loud, just thinking them. And sometimes, the machine would answer with tones, repeats, reverse pulses, as if something was trying to learn how to speak back. Then on June 2nd, everything stopped. No pulses, no tones, just silence. He waited for a week, then 2, nothing, no signal, no hum. And then one night, he tried playing back a blank reel he had left threaded out of habit, and the voice returned. This time it was clear. Not loud but understandable. It spoke in a slow, rasping monotone. According to Raymond's transcription, it said, "We were outside once, but you brought us in. Now we are hungry, and you've shown us how to eat. That was the last full entry. The rest of the notebook is scrawled nonsense, symbols, diagrams, the same phrase written over and over again. It's the tape that wasn't recorded. When the building was inspected following Raymond's disappearance in August, investigators found his equipment partially disassembled. One of the speakers had melted from the inside out. The tape recorder was intact, but the reels were warped, as if exposed to intense heat. The tape itself, completely blank. But the walls had changed. In the corners of the room, small circular indentations were discovered, clusters of tiny concave marks, about the size of a fingernail. No sign of tool use. No paint. Just shallow imprints that, when connected, formed a shape not unlike a waveform. No neighbors reported hearing anything unusual. But one man from the unit next door, a retired teacher named Morris Lang, told the inspector something odd. He said that for weeks before Raymond vanished, his radio alarm clock would switch on at exactly 2:46 a.m., even though it was unplugged. And sometimes, just before the static faded, he swore he heard someone whispering. Not in English, not in words, just a sound. A sound that felt like it wanted out. No tape was ever found that could reproduce it. No machine ever made it speak again. But sometimes, when the air is still and the electric current hums just right through the walls of an old building, people say you can feel something pressing through the wires, listening, reaching, waiting to be recorded.
Part 9. The lighthouse that never had a keeper. There are lighthouses along the coast of Maine that haven't been in use for decades. They stand like bones on the edge of the land, tall, quiet, forgotten by shipping routes, and replaced by digital signals and GPS. Most of them are maintained by the state or sold off to preservation societies. A few are abandoned entirely, left to weather and salt and wind. But among all these monuments to lost navigation, there is one that doesn't appear on any chart, past or present. No name, no coordinates, no record of its construction, and no one, at least no one who's spoken publicly, admits to knowing how it came to be. It's known, unofficially, as Beacon 137. The first mention came in 1981, from a fisherman named Albie Kessler. He operated a small trawler out of Bar Harbor, mostly working solo after his brother retired from the sea. In July of that year, he docked 2 hours late and visibly shaken, not drunk, not sick, just quiet. When his neighbor asked what happened, Albie just said, "Saw a light where there shouldn't be a light." He never gave more detail than that. But over the years, others began reporting similar sightings, always in the same patch of sea, roughly 10 nautical miles south of an old buoy line that hadn't been serviced in years. They described a beam cutting through the mist, sometimes faint, sometimes blinding, but always steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat on the horizon. Several captains altered their routes to investigate. None ever found the source. The light would vanish as they approached, only to reappear hours later, further off, as if watching from a distance. Then, in the winter of 1988, a Coast Guard crew doing a routine ice patrol in a fixed-wing aircraft reported visual confirmation of a structure matching the dimensions of a lighthouse, narrow stone base, elevated lantern room, maybe 50 feet tall. It was seen only once from the air and never spotted again. A follow-up search by boat found nothing. No foundation, no wreckage, no landmass, just water and ice. No official report was filed. Years passed, sightings dwindled. Then, in 1997, 3 university students on a sailing trip from Nova Scotia to Boston reported an unexpected change in their instruments. According to their written statement, both compass and GPS failed simultaneously about an hour after sunset. Visibility was low, heavy fog. They claimed a light appeared ahead of them, sharp, steady, sweeping the ocean surface like an old-style Fresnel beam. Thinking they were nearing shore or an unlisted beacon, they adjusted course and followed it. It led them in a slow arc for nearly 2 hours. They described the atmosphere as oppressive, quiet in a way the ocean never is. Even the lapping of the waves seemed muffled. And every time the beam passed over them, the cabin lights dimmed, and the onboard electronics would flicker, not fail, just waver, like something was breathing through the wires. Eventually, the fog broke, and the light was gone. No shore, no land, nothing but open water. Moments later, their instruments came back online. When they checked their position, they found they had traveled in a wide, precise circle. The GPS coordinates formed a perfect ring, with no deviation. That log, taken from their navigation system, was later submitted anonymously to a maritime forum where it drew little attention, except from one man. He identified himself only as G. Miller, a retired lighthouse keeper who had once worked the stations along the northern coast. In a private message sent to the students, which one of them later published, he wrote, "You saw the one that shouldn't be there. We called it 137 because there used to be 136 towers along this coast. That one made 137, but it was never built, never manned, never lit by human hands. And if you see it, you're not supposed to be where you are." Miller went on to claim that 137 wasn't always visible. It didn't follow tides or weather. It chose when to appear. He said he saw it only once, in 1965, from the catwalk of his own station just after a storm had passed. He watched it from 5 miles out, standing impossibly tall in a patch of water where no rock could support it. The light moved unnaturally slow, and each rotation seemed to pull at something behind his eyes, like gravity had bent slightly toward it. Then the beam landed on him. He said he couldn't breathe. Not in the way panic takes the breath, but as if his lungs had simply forgotten how to work. As if the air had been pulled out of the world, and for just a moment, everything fell silent, even the sea. Then the beam moved, and he collapsed to the floor, gasping. When he looked back, the tower was gone. Miller claimed that afterward, he began hearing whispers in the fog, low tones on the edge of his hearing, like radio static shaped into syllables. Once he found his logbook rewritten, dozens of entries scrawled over in a hand that wasn't his, with dates that hadn't happened yet. He left the service 6 months later, and never returned to the sea. To this day, no government agency acknowledges the existence of any such structure. Satellite imaging shows nothing. No photos exist, none that can be verified, but a few have tried. In 2004, a retired naval technician named Lena Ortiz launched a private expedition using her own sailboat and a network of weather balloons equipped with low-light cameras. Her aim was to document what she called the phantom lighthouses reported throughout maritime folklore. She spent 3 weeks charting anomalies along the northeast coast. On her final night, her log ends abruptly. One last entry: "There is no door, but something watches from the lantern room." Her vessel was found adrift 5 days later. No signs of struggle, no Lena. The logbook was damp but intact. All her footage was missing. Storage cards wiped clean, drives unreadable. But inside the ship's navigation drawer was a single piece of heavy paper. On it, drawn in pencil, was a sketch of a tall, narrow lighthouse with no stairs, no ladder, and no entrance. Just smooth stone, and a single, unblinking eye where the lantern should be. It said the sea forgets, that it takes what it wants and buries it in silence. But not everything drowns. Some things wait, standing where no one should stand, turning light toward places no one should see. And if you ever find yourself far off course, alone on a moonless sea, and a steady light begins to sweep across the waves, don't follow it. Because not all lighthouses are built to bring you home. Some were never meant to guide anything back. Part 10. The tenant in room 313 hotels are designed to be forgettable. They're built around efficiency, symmetry, and soft repetition. Carpet patterns that blend into one another. Beige walls meant to calm. Art that means nothing. It's intentional. A hotel is a place where you are meant to be no one, to exist without leaving a trace. And yet, for all their anonymity, some rooms hold on to things. Memories, presences, stains in the air that no renovation can erase. This is the story of one of them. The Edgewater Grand Hotel was built in 1928 on the western edge of Chicago, back when the city was still clawing its way into the sky, one steel beam at a time. It wasn't luxurious by any means, but it was proud. Marble lobby, brass elevators, a piano that played itself in the corner by the bar. Over the decades it changed names, changed owners, and changed hands. But one room remained the same, room 313. It was never the largest, not the best view, not even on the corner. But by 1964, the staff had stopped renting it. Officially, it was listed as under renovation. Unofficially, they called it the waiting room. Because people who stayed there never seemed to leave the same way they entered. The first incident is poorly documented, but it left enough of a mark that other reports began to surface. In 1958, a traveling salesman named Edward Caro checked into 313 while on a 3-day circuit between Detroit and St. Louis. He was found sitting in the room's single chair, facing the door, eyes wide open, not dead, not hurt, just silent, completely unresponsive. When paramedics arrived, they said he was in a catatonic state, but his vitals were fine. No drugs, no alcohol. He remained that way for 47 hours. Then he blinked, looked up at the nurse and said he wanted to know my name. He never elaborated, never explained who he was. But from that day forward, Edward refused to enter buildings taller than 3 stories. His wife said he wouldn't sleep indoors unless every light was on. He died 7 years later of a heart attack in a Motel 6. The television playing at maximum volume, every light bulb in the room shattered from overuse. Over the next few years, reports from room 313 grew more frequent. Guests would call the front desk in the middle of the night to report voices in the air vents, rhythmic tapping from inside the walls, soft knocking from inside the bathroom mirror. One woman said she awoke to find a man sitting on the edge of her bed, looking out the window. When she turned on the light, no one was there, but the shape of someone's weight remained in the blanket. Another guest swore she saw a figure in the mirror brushing its hair, though she was alone in the room and facing the opposite direction. Then, in the fall of 1973, a janitor named Horace Wells disappeared. He'd been working night shift for 3 years, quiet, reliable, never late. That October, he was asked to do a sweep of the 3rd floor after reports of flickering lights and a strange odor. The elevators were out that night due to maintenance, so he took the stairs. He never came back. At first, they assumed he'd left early, but when he didn't show up for his next shift and his car was found still parked in the lot, the hotel launched an internal search. His supply cart was found in the hallway outside room 313, mop bucket still damp. The door was locked from the inside. Security opened it, no sign of Horace, but the air inside the room was thick with humidity, as if someone had been boiling water for hours. The lights flickered in perfect rhythm, like a heartbeat. The mirror was fogged over, though there was no sink or shower running, and scrawled into the condensation across the glass, in perfect block lettering, was a phrase, "I am the tenant." The police were called. An investigation followed. Nothing was found. No fingerprints, no signs of forced entry or exit. The door had been locked with a key, not the latch. Horace's keys were never recovered. The hotel closed 313. After that, officially it became a storage room, but the hallway lights outside it never stopped flickering, and the air near the threshold always felt a few degrees warmer. Staff avoided the floor when they could. Those who worked there longest said the carpet directly in front of 313 seemed to wear out faster than anywhere else, like something heavy stood there, every night, waiting. Then in 1992, the building was bought by a real estate group that specialized in urban revival. They gutted the interior, turned half the rooms into loft-style apartments, and rebranded it as the Belmont Residences. Most of the original layout was changed, but the space that had been 313 remained untouched, zoned for utility access, according to the blueprints. It had no windows, no pipes, no outlets, just 4 bare walls and a single steel door with no knob. It remained sealed for years, until one night in 2003, when a tenant on the 4th floor reported strange vibrations through their floorboards, steady, rhythmic, as if something massive were moving just beneath them. Maintenance checked the HVAC. Nothing. Electrical. Clean. They eventually traced the vibration to the walls, specifically, the shaft that had once been room 313. Inside, they found the door standing open. There was no furniture, no dust, no insects, just a perfect circle in the middle of the floor, maybe 6 feet across, darker than the surrounding tile, as if something had been sitting there for a long, long time, or someone. Security footage from that night was reviewed. The hallway camera showed nothing, no one approaching, no one entering. But at 2:46 a.m., the hallway lights blinked once. Then for exactly 23 seconds, the frame glitched. When it cleared, the door was open. No one has lived in that room since. If you walk through the halls of the Belmont now, you won't find any signs. No number plates, just a blank stretch of wall between 2 fire doors. But those who've lived there long enough know where it is. You can feel it. A pocket of air that hums slightly when you stand still. A sense of being watched from the wrong angle. And if you lean close enough to the wall, just on the right night, some say you'll hear breathing. Not loud, not gasping, just slow, steady, patient. The tenant never left, because the room was never meant to be rented, only occupied. Part 11. the whistler at the border tree. At the meeting point between Tennessee and North Carolina, where the Appalachian Trail narrows into a winding corridor of moss and shale, there's a crooked tree that leans over a boundary stone. It's not marked on any map. There are no trail signs, no cairns to point the way. But hikers talk about it, quietly, in the kinds of conversations held at campsites just before sleep, when the fire has died to embers and the dark begins to listen. They call it the border tree, a twisted hemlock, hunched and bare on one side, as if it were scorched by lightning that never came. It grows at the edge of a sharp slope, surrounded by silence. Not just quiet, but an absence. No birdsong, no wind, not even the buzz of insects, just stillness. Like the forest there is holding its breath. Those who find it rarely do so on purpose. They stumble upon it, lose the trail, take a wrong turn, walk a little too far down a path that wasn't there yesterday, and when they reach the tree, the first thing they notice is the air, colder, heavier, as though they've stepped into a forgotten cellar carved from the bones of the mountain. The stories are never told the same way twice, but one detail remains constant: the whistling. It always begins at dusk. Not music, not a melody, just 3 rising notes, soft, breathy, as if made by lips that have never learned how to shape sound. The notes come from somewhere behind you, no matter which way you turn, and they're always followed by footsteps. Not running, not slow, just steady, unhurried, as if someone or something is walking a few paces behind, matching your speed exactly. If you stop, the steps stop. If you turn, there's nothing there. But the whistling never goes away. It continues until you reach a point on the trail where the canopy breaks and the sun touches the ground again. Then it vanishes. For most, that's the end of it. A strange encounter, a chill up the spine, a story to share years later, watered down with laughter and beer. But for a few, very few, it doesn't end when they leave the forest. In 1995, a woman named Darlene Kepler hiked solo through that stretch as part of her personal goal to finish the entire Appalachian Trail. Her journal, later found in a dry bag along the Virginia border, details her day-to-day progress in meticulous, cheerful entries. But on October 17th, her tone changed. The entry is short, the handwriting uneven. Heard whistling tonight. 3 notes, like someone calling a dog. No one out here for miles. Waited for it to stop. It didn't. Slept with my headlamp on. Couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. Her next entry, 2 days later, is even stranger. Dreamed I was under the border tree. Only I was below it. Inside something. The roots curled over me like ribs. Couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The whistling was above me. But it wasn't coming from lips. It was leaking out of the bark. That was the last full entry she wrote. A week later, another hiker found her pack hanging from a branch near the edge of a cliff, zipped and dry. Her clothes were folded neatly on a flat rock nearby. No blood, no footprints, no body. The only thing left behind was a small scrap of paper folded into the lining of her jacket. It said, "He asked my name." The local search and rescue effort spanned 2 counties, bringing in dogs, choppers, volunteers. Nothing turned up. Not even a trace. It was as if she'd walked off the edge of the world. Her case remains unsolved. But the rangers who worked that stretch of forest still carry the story. They won't say her name out loud, and they never, under any circumstances, whistle while they work. There's a theory, quiet, unpopular, and mostly shared by those who've worked too many years in the woods, that the border tree isn't just a tree, that it's a marker, not just for geography, but for something older. Something that watches from the deeper shadows, something that collects names. Those who follow the whistle too closely don't always come back. Or if they do, something about them has shifted. Their eyes don't track quite right. Their voices come slower, like they're listening to something else as they speak. One park ranger who returned from a solo patrol near that ridge refused to re-enter the forest. When asked what happened, he said only this: "It doesn't walk. It remembers, and when it whistles, it's calling the names it already owns." He left his job 3 months later, moved west, disconnected his phone. No one's heard from him since. Still, the trail remains open. Most hikers never find the tree. Most never hear the notes. But if you do, if you find yourself on a path you don't remember taking, standing before a tree that seems to lean toward you just slightly, unnaturally. Listen. If you hear 3 notes rise from behind your back and feel the hairs on your arms begin to lift, do not stop, do not turn, do not answer. Because the thing behind you already knows you're there, and it has been waiting, not to chase, to remember.
Part 12. The house that remembers you. Some houses are built to shelter, some are built to impress, and a rare few are built with something else in mind entirely, structures that don't quite sit right against the earth, where the walls feel closer than they should, where silence clings like dust no matter how loudly the floorboards groan. This story is about one of those. A house that doesn't just hold memory, it collects it, and sometimes it gives it back. The property stood on the edge of a forgotten township in northern Pennsylvania, just beyond a defunct rail line swallowed by briars. Officially, the town was unincorporated sometime in the 1940s. After a series of floods made the land too unstable for development, the buildings were left to rot. Most collapsed under snow or treefall, but one remained. It didn't have an address, just coordinates, passed between amateur explorers and urban decay hobbyists, under a nickname they never explained. The Threading House. The first known account comes from a man named Caleb Boone, who posted a thread in an obscure online forum dedicated to architectural anomalies in 2006. He was a surveyor by trade, often hiking into forgotten pockets of forest to inspect old structures and log their coordinates for historical societies. He found the house after noticing a dense patch of woodland on a topographical map where the tree growth seemed wrong, as if something had flattened a perfect circle into the forest floor. When he reached the site, the tree canopy thinned abruptly, and there it was. A 2-story colonial yellowing clapboard, black shutters, a wide front porch that sagged in the middle like a mouth. The air smelled of copper and rain, though the sky was clear. Boone noted no signs of habitation, no footprints, no graffiti. The windows were intact, the door closed but not locked. What struck him most was the condition, not decayed, exactly, but preserved. No dust, no cobwebs, just stillness. Inside, everything was clean but dated. Furniture from the 1940s, a grandfather clock with no hands, shelves lined with books that had no titles on the spines. The wallpaper curled in places, revealing a second, older pattern beneath it. Boone described the atmosphere as oppressive, like being underwater without the pressure, only the awareness that time wasn't moving quite right. And then he found the hallway. It was narrow, tucked behind a false panel near the kitchen. The passage sloped slightly downward, the wallpaper growing darker with each step, not in design, but in shade, as if it had absorbed something. At the end of the hallway was a single door, no handle, just a keyhole, surrounded by scratches. He leaned down to inspect it, and heard something breathing, not loud, not aggressive, just present, as if the walls themselves were inhaling. When he stepped back, the hallway light, bare bulb, no shade, flickered once, then again, and then the door opened on its own. Behind it was a room that should not have existed. The ceiling arched higher than the second floor would allow. The walls sloped outward like the inside of a cathedral, but the room was narrow, almost coffin-like. No furniture, just dozens, maybe hundreds of objects, suspended by thin red threads from the ceiling. Photos, keys, locks of hair, coins, a child's shoe. Each item hung perfectly still, not even swaying, as though air refused to touch them. Boone recognized one of the objects immediately, a brass compass. Identical to the one his father had carried in Vietnam, an heirloom he'd lost in a house fire when Boone was just 12. He stepped forward to reach for it, and that's when he saw the door had closed behind him. No sound, no click, but the room had changed. The ceiling seemed farther away, the threads were longer now, reaching endlessly into the dark above. He tried to pull the door open. It didn't budge, then the walls began to whisper. He wrote that it wasn't words, just the shape of words. Impressions, memories he hadn't touched in years began to surface, uninvited. The scent of his mother's shampoo, the way his childhood dog whimpered during storms, the texture of carpet in the hallway where he'd once slept after a nightmare. All of it rushed into him, crowding his chest like water in lungs. He dropped to his knees, clutching the compass. And the house spoke, not aloud, not in a voice, but directly into the memory center of his brain. He described it like being threaded, a single idea pushed through every memory at once. You were here before. Then he woke up, not outside, not at home, but on the stairs inside the front hall of the house.
Dust now coated the walls. The furniture had collapsed in on itself, mold lined the baseboards, the clock had fallen and shattered. He stumbled outside, blinking against the sunlight, and found that his compass, his father's compass, was in his hand. But it didn't point north. The needle spun endlessly, silent and fast. He left, never returned. Others have since tried to find the threading house. Coordinates were passed online, but every report ended the same way. The house is only there when it wants to be. People walk the forest for hours, sometimes days, and never find a trace. But the ones who do always describe the same strange effect afterward. Memories out of order, dreams of places they've never visited, the smell of dust and red thread in their laundry, and occasionally they find items in their home they don't remember bringing there. A black and white photo of themselves as a child, but the background is wrong. A key that opens no door, a toy from a childhood they didn't live. Small things, out of place, left like bookmarks, as if the house is keeping track. Because the threading house doesn't just remember you, it categorizes you. And once you've been inside, it holds onto your pattern until it's ready to weave you back in. Part 13. The Faces Beneath the Reservoir. In central Colorado, there's a man-made lake called Carter's Hollow Reservoir. It's nestled between two ridges of red stone and pine, a quiet crescent-shaped body of water that serves as both a backup supply for nearby towns and a popular fishing spot for locals. On paper, it's unremarkable, just another hydroengineering project completed in the early 1980s, with a dam, a maintenance road, and a small ranger outpost that stays locked most of the year. But for decades, the surrounding area has carried a reputation that the state prefers not to address. People don't swim in Carter's Hollow. They say it's the reflections, not yours, but others, shapes that appear when the water goes still, faces that don't belong to anyone nearby. Some submerged too deep to see clearly, others just below the surface, eyes open, mouths moving like they're trying to speak through the water. These aren't quick illusions. They don't vanish when you blink. They stay, and sometimes they rise. The oldest version of the story goes back to 1949, before the dam existed. Back then, Carter's Hollow was a dry valley scattered with pines, deer trails, and a few abandoned cabins left over from the silver boom. One such cabin sat at the lowest point of the basin, near a bend in the creek where the trees grew stunted and black. Locals called it Widow's Bottom. No one remembers why. What they do remember is the incident. In November of that year, 4 surveyors were contracted to assess the land for potential flood containment. They arrived in pairs over 2 days, logging soil quality and photographing the terrain. Their final report was never filed. When the ranger came to check the site 3 days later, he found their tents unzipped and abandoned. The equipment was untouched. The fire was out. Nearby, deep boot prints circled the perimeter of the cabin, though none of the men were reported to have entered it. The door was nailed shut from the outside. And then there was the journal. Recovered from the inner pocket of one of the canvas tents, the small green notebook belonged to a man named Thomas Grady. His notes were straightforward until the last 2 entries. November 5th, 10:22 p.m. Greg says he saw someone in the creek. Not a deer, standing still, watching. We checked. Nothing. November 6th, 1:15 a.m. It called my name. The reflection. It wasn't me. No bodies were ever recovered. The investigation concluded they likely fell into the creek and were swept away, though locals argued the current wasn't strong enough. Regardless, 2 years later, the project was approved. The valley was cleared. The cabin was dismantled and buried, along with every tree, stone and trail that had once crossed the basin. In 1981, after years of excavation and rerouting, the dam was sealed and Carter's Hollow filled with water. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. In the summer of 1983, a family camping near the eastern ridge reported hearing voices at night, not just murmurs, but individual sentences, names, requests, descriptions of events no one should have known. The father, a firefighter from Denver, reported that one voice described in detail the collapse of a grain silo he had responded to 6 years prior, an incident not publicly recorded. He didn't tell his wife, but he left early the next morning. The following year, a boy fishing with his uncle saw something in the water, a shape just beneath the surface, drifting slowly toward the shallows. At first he thought it was a log. Then he saw the eyes, open, unblinking, and a mouth, slack and silent, repeating something in slow, deliberate movements. He said it was his mother's face. that his mother had died 2 years before. The uncle didn't see it, but when the boy refused to return to the lake, the story spread. Other children began talking about the people under the water. Not corpses, not monsters, just faces. Familiar, wrong, moving without breath, watching without blinking. By 1990, so many rumors had piled up that the county quietly restricted access to the reservoir after dusk. The reason listed was wildlife protection, but those who lived near the base of the valley said the real reason was simpler. People were starting to see their own faces looking back, not mirrored, not reversed, duplicated. These faces, they said, looked exactly like them, but a few seconds delayed, like an echo in the water. You'd lean over the edge, expecting your reflection to match your movement. Instead it lagged, smiled after you stopped, blinked when your eyes were still, and then on very rare occasions, it wouldn't match at all. It would turn and look at something behind you. In 2003, a biologist conducting tests on algae samples near the reservoir's center went missing. His kayak was recovered near the outflow channel, perfectly balanced, his oars still tethered. His GPS showed a path circling the lake twice before stopping suddenly. The device had recorded audio during the trip. Most of it was wind and water, except at the 1 hour, 12-minute mark. A voice recorded faintly over the surface of the lake, whispering, "Where did you bury me?" The voice didn't match the biologist's. It was slower, drier, like it had learned to speak by watching people from a distance. State officials dismissed it as interference, but the audio file was quietly removed from the report. Only one technician kept a copy. He left the department 6 months later. According to his sister, he stopped speaking entirely, wouldn't go near water, wouldn't look into mirrors. And when he finally agreed to see a therapist, he brought one photo with him, an image taken from the kayak's mounted camera just before it lost signal. It shows a section of the reservoir's surface, perfectly calm. But in the lower corner, reflected in the water where the man's arm should have been, is a second face, identical to his, but smiling. There are rumors that Carter's Hollow was built on unstable ground, that the lake bed wasn't fully cleared before the flooding began, that the remnants of the cabin foundation, fireplace, cellar still exist beneath 40 feet of dark water. But some say it isn't the cabin that matters, it's the ground itself. Whatever was buried there long before the surveyors came, long before the trees were cut, something old, something that remembers what it covers. And now that memory floats, sometimes as a face, sometimes as a voice, sometimes as your own shape, return to you not as a reflection, but as an invitation. All it asks is your name, and once you answer, the water never forgets. Part 14. The Clock That Counted Backward. In a private collection in upstate Vermont, kept in a fireproof vault below a converted textile mill, is an object never displayed to the public. It's listed on the inventory as Item 144B, timepiece, brass and oak, non-functional, though every curator who's encountered it agrees on one thing: the clock is not broken. It works, but only in the presence of certain people. And when it works, it doesn't keep time, it undoes it. The origin of the clock is difficult to trace. Its craftsmanship suggests early 19th century design, mahogany inlay, brass hands, Roman numerals, hand-carved into the face. There's no manufacturer's mark, no serial number, nothing to indicate where or by whom it was built. The first verifiable record of its existence appears in an estate ledger from 1871, in which a Boston attorney named Enoch Pierce filed an insurance claim for mental and spatial disorientation, allegedly caused by the chime box in my grandfather's parlor. The wording is vague, but the symptoms listed in the report are not. Pierce claimed that upon winding the clock and setting the time, he experienced a sensation of falling, not physically, but inwardly, as though some part of his perception had slipped free from the present moment. His body remained where it stood, but his memory distorted. He described knowing things he had not yet lived, names he hadn't learned, smells from places he had never visited. For 37 minutes he believed he was no longer himself, but rather a younger version of his father, reliving the last day of his life. When the sensation passed, the clock had stopped. Its hands pointed not to the current time, but to 1 hour earlier than when he had wound it. Pierce had no history of mental illness, no known delusions. The claim was denied, but the clock was kept. Years later, in 1909, the same item surfaced in the home of a historian named Lydia Morse. a woman obsessed with documenting lost family trees and orphaned lineages. She had purchased the clock at an estate sale in Cambridge, mistaking it for a Civil War-era mantelpiece. According to her diary, preserved in the same vault as the clock, she first noticed its odd behavior after an emotional dream about her grandmother, a woman she never met but often researched. That morning, the clock began ticking on its own, not forward, backward, exactly 1 second per second, and with each minute that passed, Lydia described a sensation of time peeling away, memories surfacing in reverse order, a lifetime unspooling. The further the clock moved, the further back she went, not physically, but experientially. Her muscles ached with old injuries she hadn't felt in decades. Her hands, arthritic from years of work, began to loosen. Her vision cleared, her grief sharpened. She could feel the exact moment her father died, and the silence that followed it in her mother's house. She claimed she could hear the silence again, perfectly preserved. It lasted just under an hour. The moment the clock hit the hour mark, exactly 60 minutes behind where it had started, it stopped with a soft mechanical click, and everything returned. Her age, her pain, her awareness, but she remembered all of it. Every sensation, every emotion, everything she thought had been lost to time. After that, she locked the clock away and never wound it again, but she kept it, perhaps out of reverence, perhaps fear. She wrote one final note before her death in 1913. It does not go backward, it goes deeper. There is something at the bottom. Over the next 100 years, the clock passed quietly between collectors, museums and scholars, always under different names. The reverse timepiece, the memory dial, the traveler's wound. Each owner discovered its function the same way by accident. It never responded to intent, only emotion. When wound in the presence of someone grieving, someone haunted, or someone deeply anchored to a past moment, the clock would begin to tick in reverse. And with each tick, the person would begin to relive, not just recall but re-inhabit, a portion of their own timeline. The effect never lasted longer than an hour, but in that hour, it was total. There were rules. The same person could not activate the clock twice. It would remain inert in their presence forever after. The clock only responded to people, not animals, not electrical devices. Attempts to artificially wind or simulate the experience failed every time, and it only ever moved backward. No one ever managed to set it forward by even a single tick. In 1967, a psychologist named Harold Fleiss attempted to test the phenomenon under controlled conditions. He gathered 12 participants, each with documented cases of memory loss or trauma, and asked them to wind the clock one by one while wired to biometric sensors. Only 4 participants triggered the mechanism. All 4 exhibited immediate physiological changes: elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, dilation of the pupils. The EEG of one participant showed activity consistent with REM sleep, despite being fully conscious. She cried for the entire hour. When it was over, she had recovered the name of a brother she hadn't seen since she was 7. She died of an aneurysm 2 days later. Fleiss ended the study and refused to publish. He donated the clock to a private preservation society with one condition: it never be used again. But of course it was. In 1985, a night guard at the facility opened the storage case out of curiosity. He had recently lost his daughter in a car accident and spent long hours wandering the aisles of forgotten artifacts, hoping to feel nothing. He found the clock, wound it, and sat in front of it. When his shift replacement arrived, they found him smiling, tears streaming down his face. His eyes were closed. He was mouthing something, repeating the same phrase over and over again. "Don't go, baby, don't go." The clock stopped at 4:03 a.m. His daughter had died at 4:03 a.m. exactly 1 month earlier. After that, the Preservation Society built a vault, temperature-controlled, soundproof, shielded from electromagnetic fields, and they locked the clock inside, along with every note, journal, and photo connected to it. They believe it is a lens, a device that, when exposed to enough human memory, can refract the past in a way the mind can temporarily enter. But the cost is weight. Each use seems to deepen the effect, not on the person, but on the clock itself. Its wood has darkened. The brass hands are no longer gold, but copper green. There is now a faint vibration in the air near the case, like something winding itself from the inside, waiting for someone else to grieve just deeply enough to activate it again. Because this clock doesn't mark hours, it hunts moments, and once it knows the shape of your sorrow, it can bring you back to it. Not forever, just long enough to feel what was lost, just long enough to tempt you into believing that time, your time isn't over. Not yet. Just one more turn of the key. Part 15. The Voice Behind the Glass. In 1972, a communications researcher named Daniel Harrow began a government-funded study in upstate New York, tucked into the quiet hills of the Hudson Valley. His goal was simple on paper: to test the limits of human perception in sound-isolated environments. The facility used for this research was modest, a converted Cold War fallout shelter lined with layers of acoustic insulation. No windows, no signal interference. Inside, subjects would sit in a soundproofed room for several hours, monitored through a pane of sound-resistant glass, their responses recorded and analyzed. The room itself was called Chamber A. It was small, undecorated, and intensely silent, so silent, in fact, that the human ear began to hear things it normally wouldn't. The beat of one's own heart, the crunch of joints shifting, the faint sound of blood pulsing behind the eyes. Harrow was fascinated by what happened to the mind when all external noise was stripped away, but what he didn't expect was how quickly the silence would begin to fill itself. The first subject to report hearing a voice was a man named Adrian Booth, a biology student from Albany. During his second session, about 38 minutes in, he suddenly stood up, walked to the observation window, and asked Harrow a strange question. "Is there someone else in there with me?" Harrow, confused, reassured him that he was alone. Booth seemed unconvinced. He sat back down but didn't close his eyes again. Instead, he stared into the far corner of the room, jaw tense, lips slightly parted. When the session ended, Booth left without elaborating. Later that evening, however, he called Harrow's office from a payphone and left a message on the answering machine. "You didn't hear it because it wasn't for you. It was coming from the glass." After that, subject after subject began reporting similar experiences. First a murmur, then words, always faint, always coming from somewhere just outside their own ears. Some claimed it was behind them, others said it was directly in front, whispering through the observation window even though it was soundproof. No two voices were the same, but all shared one trait: they spoke as if they knew who was listening. One woman, a teacher from Rochester, claimed the voice behind the glass recited lines from a letter her mother had written to her as a child, a letter that had been lost in a house fire when she was 12. The words were exact, not similar, exact. She left the session trembling, unable to speak for hours. Another subject, a man named Lucas Trent, claimed the voice asked him questions, not general ones but specific: names, locations, memories, events he hadn't shared with anyone in decades. When asked what the voice sounded like, he said it wasn't a sound at all, but a feeling that formed into words, like a breath fogging a mirror in my brain. At first, Harrow suspected mass suggestion, subjects hearing rumors, absorbing ideas from each other, but his protocols were airtight. Subjects were isolated. They weren't allowed to speak to one another. None of the recordings picked up external audio, just the clicks of their mouths, the shifting of their feet, and occasionally, very faintly, a sound like air moving the wrong way through a straw. Then came the session with subject 16. Her name was Beatrice Alton. She was a quiet woman in her mid-60s, retired librarian, and had signed up for the study out of curiosity. She entered Chamber A without incident. Harrow watched from the adjacent room, making notes as usual, but 12 minutes into the session, Beatrice tilted her head sharply, as if reacting to a sudden piercing sound. Then she began to cry, not loud, not desperate, just tears, quietly falling as she stared into the mirror-like pane of glass. After several minutes, she leaned forward in her chair and whispered something. The microphones didn't catch it. Harrow tapped the intercom. "Is everything okay?" Beatrice smiled through the glass and shook her head. Then she pointed, not at the microphone, not at the speaker, at him. Through the thick pane of reinforced glass, she locked eyes with Harrow and mouthed one sentence: "It wants your voice next." The session ended early. Beatrice would not explain what she heard. She refused to come back, but that night, Harrow stayed in the facility. He reviewed the footage, watched her gestures, played the audio on loop. Then, against protocol, he entered Chamber A himself. He brought no assistant, no recording devices, just a chair, a notepad, and a stopwatch. He lasted 24 minutes. When he returned, he was pale and sweating. His notepad had no writing, only a deep groove carved into the paper from where his pen had pressed down, unmoving. For several minutes straight, when asked what happened, he said only, "There's no voice until you start listening for it. And once you do, it's always there, even in silence, especially in silence." After that night, Harrow dismantled the project. The soundproofing was stripped, the equipment boxed, the chamber sealed. His notes make clear, he believed the voice was not a hallucination, not shared delusion, not sleep deprivation, not the mind echoing against emptiness. He believed the glass itself was acting as a boundary, not a mirror, not a window, a barrier, something on the other side, long confined, had learned to reflect not sound, but memory, to bend thought like light through a lens. It had no tongue, no throat, but it could press against the inner surface of silence, until it shaped something intelligible, not for everyone, just for the ones it chose. He wrote, "It does not speak with words, it breathes recognition." Harrow went missing 2 years later. His car was found parked at the edge of a wildlife reserve in Maine. In the passenger seat was a shattered rearview mirror, and a blank cassette tape labeled only with the number 0. No one has listened to the tape. Every attempt to convert it to digital has failed. No sound, no static, just a blank waveform that stretches into infinity, like something waiting for the right moment to fill the space. The observation glass from Chamber A is still stored in a locked crate, marked "Do not examine." Researchers who've stood near it claim to feel pressure in their ears, like the air is subtly collapsing inward. Sometimes they say they hear breathing, sometimes they don't. But all of them, every last one, say the same thing after walking away. "It knew I was there." And somewhere in the stillness behind the glass, something else begins to listen. Part 16. The Man Who Lived in Photographs. In the early 1990s, long before facial recognition and metadata overlays, a young archivist named Jonas Kettner was hired to assist with the digitization of a state university's neglected photography collection. It was part of a statewide preservation initiative. Tens of thousands of images from the early 20th century, donated from private families, forgotten institutions, and abandoned town halls. Most were black and white, some curling at the corners, their emulsions delicate with time. The photographs ranged from posed portraits and wedding shots, to blurry street scenes and overexposed landscapes, all loosely organized into decade-labeled boxes stacked across rusting metal shelves. Jonas's job was simple: scan, label, and tag any identifying details. A house number, a store sign, a dated calendar. Most days were routine, quiet, the kind of silence only found among paper and film, until he opened a box labeled 1934, Miskov Regional, and began to notice something strange. A man, not in just one photograph, but several, across cities, across counties, always in the background, sometimes blurred, sometimes clear, but unmistakably the same figure, tall, thin, dark overcoat, even in summer shots, narrow hat pulled low. He never faced the camera directly, but his head was often tilted just enough that part of his face, always the left side, was visible. Sharp cheekbone, slight smile, pale skin that looked almost luminous in certain exposures, as if reflecting more light than the world around him. At first, Jonas assumed it was coincidence, a recurring subject, a local vendor perhaps, or a traveling salesman captured by chance. But then he began to compare timestamps. One photo dated July 3rd, 1934, taken during a parade in Ithaca. Another from that same week, over 200 miles away, capturing a rural 4th of July celebration in Chautauqua County. The same man appears in both. Identical posture, same angle of tilt, same soft unreadable smile. Not just similar, exact. Jonas examined the negatives under magnification. No signs of tampering, different photographers, different film stock. Yet the man was there, in scene after scene. Weddings, fairs, funerals, protests, never central, always peripheral. A ghost of a face tucked into the corner of the world. He began marking them, red dots on the backs of the prints. Few small notes in pencil, subject A. But the more he looked, the more he found. In one, the man appears twice, once in the background, and again reflected in a window separated by an angle that made the duplication impossible. That night, Jonas dreamed of the man, not chasing him, not speaking, just standing still, as if posing for a photograph Jonas couldn't take. Behind him, the world was grayscale. Time felt thin, like a stretched film reel unspooling in a dark theater. He didn't sleep again for 3 days. When he shared his findings with his supervisor, she dismissed it as pareidolia, pattern recognition gone awry. She told him to refocus, to stop chasing ghosts, but Jonas couldn't. Something about the man unnerved him, not because he was present, but because he never aged. From the earliest photo dated 1927 to one found near the back of a 1952 county fair set, the man hadn't changed. Same posture, same coat, same faint expression, and then Jonas found the photo that ended everything. It was misfiled in a box labeled 1961 unknown origin. A color image washed out, slightly faded, a birthday party, suburban backyard, children laughing near a cake. And there in the corner, reflected in the window behind the mother's shoulder, was the man. Only this time, he was looking directly at the camera. For the first time, his face was fully visible. The smile was wider now, still soft, still pleasant, but there was an awareness to it, not surprise, not anger, recognition. Jonas stared at the image for hours, magnifying it, trying to convince himself that it was just a man, a trick of the light, an uncle maybe, stepping out from a hallway at the wrong time, until he saw what the man was holding. A camera, compact, black, gleaming, despite the blur, and in the viewfinder, a reflection of Jonas, not a child. Jonas now, staring straight ahead. That night, Jonas burned the photograph, but the next morning, when he returned to the archive, the image was waiting on his desk, not the original, a reprint, crisp, perfect. It hadn't existed in the collection before. The box it came from was unlabeled, still sealed in brown tape, but his name was written across the top in thick red marker. He checked the security footage. There was none. In a panic, he began checking other recent submissions, boxes he hadn't opened, roll after roll of undeveloped negatives, and there, hidden among unfamiliar faces and smiling children, he began to find himself, not the man, himself. Reflected in storefronts, sitting on benches, standing beside cars he'd never seen, and always behind him, the man, watching. Jonas left the archive that afternoon, and never returned. His apartment was found 2 weeks later, everything in order. No signs of struggle, but every mirror in the home had been turned toward the wall, every photograph clipped, burned, or buried in salt. On the desk beneath a glass dome, sat a single black and white photo, Jonas, sitting in a chair, eyes closed. Behind him, the man, closer now, smiling, and in the background, a dark room glowing red, like something had just been developed. There was no record of anyone taking the photograph. The lens used for the shot was traced to a 1931 Voigtländer model, one that had never left the archive. No one knows where Jonas is now, but new photos have surfaced in online antique forums, church events, local festivals, yearbook scans, and in several of them, users have noted the same anomaly: a blurry figure in the far corner, a long coat, a tilted head, sometimes holding a camera, and sometimes not, because the man who lived in photographs no longer needs to be captured. Now, he captures you, and once he has, he remembers the shape of your face, the way the light bends off your cheek, the exact moment your life crossed his aperture. He doesn't need your name, just your presence. And from that moment forward, somewhere in some forgotten photograph, you are already standing beside him. Part 17. The Rooms That Shouldn't Exist. In 2011, a restoration team was dispatched to an abandoned high school in northeastern Indiana, tasked with preparing the building for demolition. The town of Wexley had dissolved into near non-existence after the local steel plant closed in the late 90s, and the school, Wexley Consolidated, had been shuttered for over a decade. Stripped of funding, ignored by zoning boards, and half-swallowed by prairie weeds, the building had become a local landmark only in the way that dead things sometimes are, untouched, unspoken of, but still present. The restoration team, a trio of freelance contractors, began with the basics, securing the roofline, mapping structural weaknesses, checking for asbestos. The building was typical of mid-20th century architecture: square, utilitarian,
sunken into the earth like a bunker. 2 floors, an east and west wing, a central stairwell. They had copies of the original blueprints, diagrams marked with dusty fingerprints and faded red ink. And yet, by the second day, they found a hallway that wasn't supposed to be there. It branched off the east wing at a subtle angle, nearly imperceptible unless you were walking directly toward it. Dim, narrow, 10 feet long at most, terminating in a wooden door with no handle, just a keyhole carved into brass. The contractors thought it might have been a janitorial addition, something added later without permits. They checked the blueprints again. It didn't exist. Not on the original layout, not on the revised fire plans from 1984, not even on the emergency evacuation maps tacked to the wall nearby. The hallway, in every official record, simply wasn't there. They returned the next morning, determined to open the door. It was already open, not wide, just enough to show the edge of a tiled floor, stained and yellowed like teeth. No light inside. The air that drifted out was dry, still, tinged with an acidic smell that reminded one of the workers of an old science lab. Bleach, formaldehyde, heat that had soaked too long into linoleum. Inside was a room that also did not exist. Windowless, unfurnished, perfectly square. The walls were concrete painted a pale, uneven grey, as if done hastily by hand. And along the top edge of every wall, just beneath where a ceiling should have been, ran a line of text, written in looping cursive. The lesson must be remembered, even when the building forgets. There were no chairs, no chalkboard, no door on the inside, just the opening they had entered through, which they now noticed had no visible frame, just a clean cut in the wall that led into and out of the space, like it had always been there. The room disturbed them, but none could explain why. They left. The next day, it was gone. No hallway, no door, just the wall, blank and whole, with no evidence it had ever been broken or cut. They didn't tell anyone. Some things, one of them said later, you keep to yourself until you're sure they're real, until you have to believe them. But the silence didn't last long. 3 nights later, one of the workers, Ryan Delano, returned to retrieve a forgotten tablet. He entered alone at dusk, flashlight in hand. The sun was low. The building's shadows had lengthened into shapes that didn't quite match their sources. The tablet was there, right where he left it. But something made him pause on his way out. A whisper, not words but tone. A rise and fall of breath, not caused by wind or structure. He followed it without thinking, and found a new hallway, not the same as before. This one was longer, smooth, painted the institutional green of hospital wards and state-run facilities. No door at the end, just a turn to the right, like the building had curled in on itself. He walked the length of it. The hallway opened into another room. This one was different. Fluorescent lights flickered above. The floor was tiled in a checkerboard pattern. There were desks, dozens, all empty. Each faced a whiteboard stained with faded red marks, numbers maybe, names. The shapes were indistinct, like someone had tried to erase them, but couldn't finish. A clock on the wall ticked slowly backward. No wires connected it to anything. In the corner of the room sat a television on a rolling cart, the kind used in the 80s for educational films. The screen was on, showing static. Beneath the fuzz, barely visible, was a silhouette of a face pressed against the inside of the glass. Not moving, just watching, as if the image had been recorded from inside the screen looking out. Ryan left without his flashlight. He drove home in silence. That night, he dreamed of sitting in the desk farthest from the door. A lesson was being given, but he couldn't hear the voice. Only the scrape of chalk. Only the feel of someone walking behind him, unseen, their breath warm against the back of his neck. He woke with a nosebleed. His watch was gone. The bedroom mirror was fogged over despite the air being cold. When the other 2 contractors returned that morning, Ryan did not come. They found the tablet in the lobby, placed gently on a chair. Later that week, the demolition was halted after inspectors reported inconsistencies in the building's floor plan. GPS scans showed multiple, unaccounted-for rooms buried within the structure, some overlapping, some recursive, impossible by architectural logic. One room was measured at 3 times its physical length. Another seemed to shift position depending on where the scanner stood. An attempt was made to investigate. Cameras failed, lights dimmed, battery life drained faster than possible.
The building was destroyed 2 months later, but the wrecking crews reported strange resistance in the walls, not structural, intentional, a quality to the concrete that vibrated at certain frequencies, like it had been tuned, like it didn't want to break cleanly. One worker's hammer shattered on impact with a section of hallway that, according to records, hadn't existed since 1979. No one ever built new structures on the lot. Grass refuses to grow in the center, and sometimes on overcast days, when the humidity sits like a weight across the valley, drivers passing by report the sudden appearance of a shadow on the old concrete foundation. A door, just visible for a moment, then gone. No knob, no hinges, just a phrase painted in cursive along where the frame would be. The lesson must be remembered, and if you listen closely through the wind that follows, you might hear the faint scratch of chalk on board, or the low, constant hum of an old television, waiting to be rolled into the room where you've always belonged, even if you've never seen it before. Part 18. The broadcast that wasn't scheduled in the winter of 1998, just past midnight on a frozen Tuesday in the outskirts of Wyoming. A local television station, identified as KCRT-12, experienced a brief, unscheduled interruption in their overnight programming. The station, like many small-market broadcasters at the time, filled late-night hours with static-laced reruns and infomercials, paid spots for miracle juicers, portable step machines, and books on cassette. The kind of television meant to lull the lonely or insomniac into half-sleep. What aired that night, however, was none of those things. The signal cut mid-commercial. One moment a woman was holding up a can of self-foaming shampoo, mid-sentence, and the next, the screen went black. For a few seconds, viewers assumed it was a power flicker. Then a new image appeared. A room, static-filled, grainy. It looked like a basement, or perhaps an old boiler room. Dim yellow light hung from a single fixture. The camera was fixed, unmoving, its field of view narrow and strangely off-center. And in the middle of the frame stood a figure, not a host, not an actor, just a man, tall, thin, dressed in a black suit, rumpled as if he'd slept in it. His tie was loose, and his hands hung stiff at his sides. He didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared into the camera for what some later calculated was exactly 6 minutes and 13 seconds. The only sound was a low droning hum in the background, too quiet to identify, but too consistent to be random. Then, without warning, the image flickered. The frame jumped slightly, as if the tape had been paused and resumed. The man's posture changed. He was now leaning forward, his hands resting on an unseen surface beneath the camera. His face was partially in shadow, but his mouth had opened, and from it came something that wasn't quite a voice. It was language, but it wasn't spoken, not normally. The words were soft, rhythmic, oddly precise, but distorted, stretched like analog tape recorded at the wrong speed. Some viewers reported hearing their own names woven into the murmurs. Others claimed he was describing events that hadn't happened yet. Train derailments, apartment fires, even a series of school closures that would occur months later due to an unexplained gas leak. And then at exactly 12:17 a.m., the image dissolved into snow. The regular broadcast resumed as if nothing had happened. No official acknowledgement followed. KCRT-12 denied the interruption occurred. Their tapes of the night were mysteriously blank. Archived footage jumped from 11:58 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. with no visible splice or distortion. The technicians on duty that night insisted they never saw the feed drop. To them it was business as usual, but the calls started the next morning, dozens of them. Viewers describing what they'd seen, some frightened, others shaken in quieter, stranger ways. One woman said her dog barked at the screen the entire time the man was visible, then refused to enter the room for a full day afterward. Another claimed her television turned on by itself at exactly 12:11 a.m., with no source selected, just static, and a voice humming something just beneath the frequency of speech. What made it worse was that not everyone remembered the same thing. Some described the man's face as smooth and pale. Others swore it was heavily wrinkled, almost melting. One caller said the room behind him was filled with clocks, all ticking at different speeds. Another remembered walls covered in old newspapers, written in a language he couldn't identify. Yet every description ended with the same feeling, something behind the man, something just out of view, a presence that didn't move, but watched. And over the following weeks, stranger things began to happen. 3 households reported their TVs turning themselves to channel 12 at exactly 12:17 a.m., regardless of what they were watching or if the television was even powered on. One man claimed that for several nights the face of the man appeared in his dreams, not speaking, just standing at the foot of his bed in a room that wasn't his own. He said the man would tilt his head slowly, as if waiting for him to ask a question he'd forgotten. A former engineer for the station, who asked not to be named, eventually came forward with a private theory. He had worked at KCRT 12 for nearly a decade and recognized the room in the broadcast, or at least he thought he did. The basement of the station had once held storage rooms from the original broadcast center, now sealed off and used only for old furniture and cables. He swore that the lighting, the wall texture, even the humming sound, matched a section of that basement exactly. But when he went to investigate, the hallway was gone, not locked, not hidden, gone. The physical space between the boiler closet and the electrical panel had always been about 20 feet. Now the 2 doors shared a frame. The wall that once housed the old storage area was now seamless concrete. No cracks, no marks, like it had never existed. He left the station a month later, citing stress. Before he departed, he took with him a VHS tape, one he claimed was a backup reel from the night of the incident, recorded independently of the master broadcast. It has never been shown publicly. Those who've seen it say the man speaks clearly on this version. His voice is sharp, clear, and what he says in the last 30 seconds is this: "This is not a broadcast, this is a rehearsal. Your role is almost ready." The tape ends with a sharp, high-pitched tone that reportedly causes mild nausea in certain listeners. The room behind the man grows darker in the final frames, but not from fading light, from something filling the space, something moving forward. Today, KCRT 12 still operates under a new name and ownership. The building has been renovated. The basement no longer exists in any structural plans. The incident is dismissed as folklore, rural paranoia wrapped in digital myth. And yet, every few years, a new post surfaces online. A clip, a timestamp, a still frame showing the silhouette of a man standing just outside the focus of a local broadcast camera, not interfering, not visible to the crew, just waiting. Because some transmissions aren't meant to be watched, they're meant to choose. Part 19. The names carved into the wind. In a sparsely populated region of eastern Montana, where the prairie swells for miles in pale, sun-scorched silence, there exists a place the locals refuse to name. It's not on any map, not mentioned in official geological surveys. But if you ask the ranchers who've lived there the longest, they'll tell you quietly, reluctantly, about the old fence. Just a single line of wire and rotted posts that runs for 100 yards, seemingly without purpose. No cattle pen, no barn nearby, no crops to shield. The land surrounding it is flat and empty, waving with yellow grass, broken only by the occasional sandstone outcrop or rusted windmill. But the fence stands anyway, stubborn against the elements, untouched by time in a way that doesn't feel natural. It doesn't sag, it doesn't split. Snow gathers at its base in winter, but never clings to the wire. What makes it more unsettling is that no one claims to have built it. The records don't show its construction. The land deeds make no mention of it. And yet everyone in the region knows where it is, knows not to walk too close after dark, knows not to say certain names when the wind moves westward, because the wind that comes across the old fence carries voices, and sometimes it carries yours. The phenomenon was first documented unofficially in 1943 by a man named Ellis Rourke, a schoolteacher turned homesteader who kept meticulous journals of local weather patterns and wildlife migrations. On April 12th of that year, Rourke wrote the following in his notebook: "Wind from the southwest, sharp, cold, fence lines sang again tonight, heard it before sundown. No wires moved, but it spoke clear this time. Not words I knew, but something like a child's whisper. A list, maybe, same cadence as reading names off a paper. One of them sounded like mine." Rourke never published his findings. He stopped writing in the journal entirely a month later. His body was found in late June, lying face down near the fence, arms stretched along the wire, like he'd tried to hug it. His ears were filled with grass. There were no wounds, no signs of struggle, but his expression was described by the coroner as unsettlingly peaceful. The notebook was found in his cabin, open to a blank page. Pressed between its last written entry and the cover was a single prairie flower, dried and flattened, though none of that species bloomed until midsummer. Over the decades, more stories surfaced. A hunter who fell asleep near the fence woke to the sound of his own mother, calling him in a voice she hadn't used since his childhood. A mail carrier who swore he saw names etched into the sky above the fence at dusk, like contrails, but fading too quickly to be read. A teenage girl who vanished for 5 hours and reappeared barefoot and shaking at her family's doorstep, repeating a single sentence over and over. "It knew my name before I was born." Some researchers theorized it was a form of wind-driven acoustics, perhaps caused by underground caverns or a rare formation of harmonics along the plain. One field team from a nearby university set up microphones and pressure gauges around the fence in 1978. They recorded over 40 hours of data. All of it was erased in a sudden equipment failure the night before analysis. Only one technician, an intern named Callum, heard the full playback in real time. He described it as layers of language, voices overlapping in tongues, ancient and modern, spoken in reverse and harmony. He claimed he heard lullabies, eulogies, wedding vows, and names, thousands of names. Then he said something no one could explain. "I heard the name I haven't been given yet, the one I'll use after I'm done being me." He left the program the following week and was never contacted again. The local indigenous tribes have their own stories about the fence, though they never claim it as part of their land. Elders speak of it as a threshold, not a structure, a place where memory grows heavier and thinner at the same time. It's been photographed in blizzards and droughts and lightning storms, and in every image, the wire remains straight, suspended, as if pulled by unseen hands toward a horizon only it can see. If you ever find it, don't speak your name aloud, not even in a whisper, because once the wind hears you, it never forgets. And someday, somewhere far from there, when the world is quiet and no breeze is supposed to stir, you'll feel something cold pass across your skin, and you'll hear your name spoken by a voice you haven't yet become. Part 20. The Girl in the Ceiling. In the heart of downtown Richmond, Virginia, there stands an old brick building known by city records as 242 Wycliffe Street. From the outside, it's forgettable. 3 stories tall, boarded windows on the top floor, faded signage from a bakery that closed sometime in the 70s. For years it sat dormant, untouched, except by the wind and the moss curling up from the sidewalk cracks. But in 2009, a group of graduate students from the university's urban architecture program received permission to enter the building as part of a preservation initiative. What they found inside should have been dust and rot, and for the most part, it was. But there was one room, just one, on the 3rd floor that hadn't aged. The walls were pristine, the floorboards clean, polished as if waxed that morning. A child's desk sat in the center of the room, perfectly centered. Next to it, a small wooden chair. On the desk, a yellowed book. No title on the cover, just line after line of tiny handwriting, precise and rigid. Page after page, the same phrase: "She lives in the ceiling. She watches me when I sleep." The students assumed it was a leftover prop from a tenant, or perhaps part of an old art installation. The kind of oddity old buildings collect when people forget their contents. But something about the air in that room was wrong. It wasn't stale, like the rest of the building. It was still, weighty, as if sound had been pulled out of it and buried under the floor. One student, Mira, noticed the temperature change first, the way it dropped several degrees when they crossed the threshold. Another swore she heard a soft scuttling above, like a mouse trapped in insulation. But there were no mice. When they looked up, they saw the ceiling tiles were smooth. No cracks, no gaps, except one tile, far in the back corner, was slightly misaligned, like it had been pushed from the other side. They didn't stay long. Over the next week, each student had strange dreams, not nightmares exactly, more like static-filled fragments of memory, distorted by age and distance. A lullaby, none of them recognized, sung in a voice just slightly too high to be human. The sound of nails scraping on drywall, rhythmic and slow, and always, a face watching from just outside the dream's edge. Not malevolent, not smiling, just present. They tried to forget, but on the 8th night, Mira woke to find fingernail marks above her bed, not scratches on the wall, but embedded into the plaster of her ceiling. 5 lines, perfectly spaced, curved as if left by a small outstretched hand dragging itself across while watching her. They returned to the building the next morning. They didn't bring equipment, just matches, kerosene, and fear. But when they arrived, The door was ajar. Inside, the room was gone. Not altered, gone. The hallway wall now stretched seamlessly across what should have been the entrance. No doorknob, no frame, just bricks. And behind the bricks, if you pressed your ear close, you could still hear the soft creak of wood. As if something was moving, slowly, gently, just above where a ceiling used to be. The building was condemned that same year. Official cause: structural instability. But no one questioned why demolition was delayed for months. The workers claimed the top floor wasn't safe. Tools disappeared. Batteries drained. One man left the site and refused to return after claiming he saw a small face peeking through a ceiling vent in the stairwell, eyes wide and unblinking.
He said it smiled at him.
Not because it was happy, but because it knew something. He said it was waiting. The demolition finally took place in early 2010, or at least most of it did. The first 2 floors collapsed easily under the wrecking equipment. But when they reached the top level, the machine operator's feed went dark. The camera wired into the cabin picked up only static. Audio cut out. The excavator stopped responding for over 6 minutes. When it finally restarted, the 3rd floor was reduced to dust. But inside the rubble, the workers found something impossible. A single ceiling tile, hall untouched, balanced perfectly atop the shattered remnants of the old floor. On the underside of the tile was a handprint, small, pressed so hard into the material that it left a slight indentation, as though the fingers had lingered there a moment too long. The tile was taken by one of the students, no one knows which, but over the years, fragments of it have reappeared in strange places. Part of it was found in a crawl space in Maryland, duct taped to the underside of a vent. Another showed up in a condemned house in Illinois, leaned against the back of a closet behind a false wall. In both cases, the tile had been modified, scratched. In the same handwriting found in the book, she still lives in the ceiling. The rumor now is that she follows people who remember her, that the girl in the ceiling doesn't haunt places. She haunts awareness, that she clings to the space above you, thin as paint, quiet as dust, just waiting for you to look up, not with fear, but recognition. And when you do, she knows. Because ceilings aren't just barriers, they're stages. And sometimes, while you're lying in bed, still and half asleep, you might hear a faint creak above your head, a breathless scurry, a whisper. If that happens, don't move, don't speak, and above all else, do not look up. Part 21. The Man with the Wrong Memories. In the summer of 1976, beneath the wide and dust-colored sky of New Mexico, a man was found walking barefoot along Interstate 40. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, leaving the world in that eerie in-between grayness that makes every shape look unfamiliar. He wore a wool coat several sizes too large for his thin frame, and though the desert wind clung to him like static, he seemed untouched by it. When a highway patrol officer pulled over and asked him if he was all right, the man answered politely, calmly, and gave a name: Martin Lee Carver. He said he was looking for his sister. What followed should have been an uneventful encounter, a routine check, a short drive to a local hospital. But the moment that name was entered into the system, the story unraveled into something that none of the responding personnel could fully explain. According to every database available at the time, Martin Carver had died in 1956, 20 years earlier. He had perished in a house fire outside Durango, Colorado, along with his parents. Dental records had confirmed his identity at the time. A funeral had been held. The death certificate had been signed and filed without dispute. And yet, standing before them was a man who looked very much like the same Martin Carver, only older, about 20 years older. He had the same angular jaw, the same dimple in his chin, and a narrow scar beneath his left eye that matched a high school yearbook photo kept in the local historical archive. He even remembered details no imposter could have guessed: the name of his dog growing up, the nickname of his elementary school teacher, and the exact placement of a loose floorboard in the farmhouse where he'd supposedly died. They brought him to a hospital for observation, and from the beginning he cooperated with every request. He submitted to blood work, psychological evaluations, memory tests and interviews, never once becoming combative or confused. He insisted that he had never died, never been in a fire, and had simply gone on with his life after leaving his family's home in his 20s. He said he had moved to Albuquerque in 1958, married a woman named Ruth in 1960, and had spent the last decade working as a surveyor for a now-defunct construction firm. Every answer came easily, and not once did he contradict himself. But when investigators tried to verify his story, nothing held. No one by the name Ruth Carver had ever held a marriage license in the state. The construction company he named had closed years earlier, but its employee logs showed no record of him. The address he listed as his former home led to an empty field. At first, the doctors considered the possibility of dissociative amnesia, or some rare fugue state triggered by trauma. But Martin showed no signs of mental distress. On the contrary, he spoke with the measured ease of a man simply trying to understand why the world no longer matched his memories. He was quiet, but not paranoid, curious, not desperate. When he was shown a newspaper article describing the fire that had killed him, he read it 3 times, eyes scanning slowly, lips pressed together in deep concentration. Eventually he looked up and said, "That's not how it happened. That's not the house I remember." And with that, he began to cry, not out of fear, but with the slow, pained sorrow of someone watching a familiar story being told wrong, as if the world had overwritten something sacred while he was away. Martin was transferred to a long-term psychiatric care facility outside Santa Fe, not because he was considered dangerous, but because no one knew what else to do with him. He continued to insist on his version of reality, drawing maps of neighborhoods no one could find, writing lists of phone numbers that returned disconnected lines, and sketching floor plans of houses he claimed to have lived in, one of which bore a nearly perfect resemblance to a 1940s tract home found demolished decades ago near Route 66. He spent long hours staring out the window of the facility's recreation room, where the view was nothing but empty desert and sky, whispering names no one recognized. At night, the staff reported hearing him talking in his sleep. The content of his murmurs was fragmented, but always centered around memories, trips he had taken, people he had loved, meals he had eaten. The only constant was his wife's name, Ruth, repeated gently, like a prayer trying not to be forgotten. But the strangest part came a few months later, when his memories began to change. It started subtly. He corrected small details, saying he had worked in Las Cruces, not Albuquerque, that Ruth was a nurse, not a secretary, that their house had red shutters, not blue. These were minor enough to be brushed off, until the changes became larger, more disorienting. Suddenly, he remembered having no children, when earlier he had spoken lovingly of a son. He reversed the order of events in his marriage. He began referring to a different address entirely, one that was in Arizona, not New Mexico. And then, one morning, he asked the nurse on duty if she had seen his dog Max. The nurse paused. He had always said his dog's name was Buddy. When she reminded him, he frowned as if the correction pained him. "Buddy died in the fire," he said softly, "but Max came after. There was no Max." Over the following weeks, Martin's demeanor grew distant. He spent less time engaging with staff, and more time staring at the ceiling, muttering words that no one could place. He claimed to see buildings outside the window that didn't exist, strange rectangular structures in the distance, glowing softly in the dusk. He no longer seemed surprised that others couldn't see them. He simply said, "They're part of the other version, the one I lived before this." And then one morning in February, he was gone. The door to his room was locked from the inside. There were no signs of forced entry, no prints on the window, no disturbance of any kind. His bed was neatly made. His shoes were placed beside it. The only item left behind was a single sheet of paper, folded carefully and tucked beneath his pillow. On it was a drawing of a farmhouse. It looked remarkably like the one that had burned down in Colorado. The same porch, the same tree stump in the front yard. But in this drawing, the house was untouched, pristine, and behind it stood a figure, small and indistinct, waving from the back fence line. Across the top of the page, in neat cursive, were the words, "This is the version that ended, not the one I came from." Martin Lee Carver was never seen again. The case remains one of the strangest missing persons reports in the region's history, not because of how he vanished, but because of when he appeared. For years afterward, strange sightings were reported along that same stretch of I-40. A man standing on the edge of the road, sometimes walking barefoot, sometimes in a dark coat, always looking slightly lost, like someone trying to navigate a city built from a memory that no longer matched the ground beneath him. And once in 2013, A graduate researcher scanning old microfilm at a university archive found a partial housing survey from 1965. Scribbled in pencil in the margins of a draft copy was the following: Resident, Martin L. Carver, wife Ruth, dog, Buddy, house, North 5th and Juniper, vacant lot, says he's lived here for years. And below that, in different handwriting, one more note: can't verify, doesn't match city records. But he knew the layout before we opened the file. Somewhere, in a version of the world that never fully existed, or perhaps one that briefly did, Martin Carver still walks, not haunting, not lost, just trying to remember which life was the right one.
Part 22. The hospital that moves at the southern edge of Kentucky, where the foothills of the Appalachians begin to roll into deep forest and mist, settles low against the land like a second skin. There is a stretch of highway that locals claim is best avoided after midnight. It's not because of animals or crime or the steep sudden turns that vanish in fog. It's because of a hospital, one that isn't supposed to be there. There are stories going back to the 1960s of drivers catching a glimpse of an unfamiliar sign near mile marker 247. It's only visible in passing, lit by an old bulb that seems too dim to function, but somehow casts a circle of yellow against the trees. The sign reads, St. Idalia Medical Center, 2 miles ahead. There are no exits at that part of the road, no intersections, and no official record of any hospital by that name ever operating in the region. But the people who see the sign, they start remembering it. That's where it begins, not with a haunting, not with an accident or a scream, but with familiarity, a soft certainty that they've been there before, maybe as a child, maybe as a visitor, a quiet waiting room, pale green walls, a nurse with a badge that didn't have a last name, just Elaine. The problem is, these memories aren't real. They can't be. Most who report them have never lived within hundreds of miles of that highway. They don't know anyone from the region. They've never worked in healthcare, but they remember the smell of antiseptic, the flickering lights in the hallway near the west wing, the uneven tile in room 304 that always tripped the gurney wheels. Some who try to investigate further find themselves pulled back to the stretch of road again and again without planning to. GPS glitches, itineraries change, detours redirect them for no discernible reason. One woman, a traveling nurse from Michigan, passed that same stretch of road 3 times over 2 months while on unrelated contracts in the South. Each time the sign was there. Each time it had shifted slightly in appearance. The 3rd time she recognized the logo printed in the corner, a silver caduceus entwined with thorns instead of snakes. She didn't remember ever seeing it before, and yet it filled her with the unmistakable sensation of going home. In 1998, a man named Thomas Ruki, an amateur historian obsessed with urban disappearances, claimed to have found the hospital. He described a narrow road veering from the main highway where no road should exist. It was overgrown, flanked by dense trees that arched overhead to form a canopy. His journal described a heavy quiet, a weight to the atmosphere, as if the air were suspended in syrup. After nearly a mile, the trees cleared, and the structure came into view. According to his notes, the building was tall, 5 stories built in the brutalist style of mid-century architecture, with narrow windows and thick concrete walls. Lights were on in the upper floors, but the parking lot was empty. No signage, no entrance gate, no movement. Still, he entered. The lobby was immaculate. A reception desk, laminated pamphlets in a rack, a faint voice on an intercom calling for a code blue. But there were no people, no staff, no patients, just the feeling of a place caught mid-breath. Hallways led to more hallways. He followed signs toward the ICU but never reached it. At some point, the corridors began to curve in ways that didn't match the building's exterior. He walked in a loop and passed the same mural 3 times, though the hallway had no turnoffs. In the mural, the painted nurses grew older with each pass. Their faces sagged, their expressions hollowed. He fled. When he returned with law enforcement the next day, the road was gone. Just a dense wall of trees where the entrance had been. His report was dismissed. His reputation collapsed. He disappeared 3 months later, last seen at a rest stop just outside the Kentucky-Tennessee border. His car was found idling, door open, radio playing static. On the passenger seat was his journal, open to the final page. 3 words scrawled hastily in red ink.
It's AD meeting now.
Some believe the hospital only appears to those who have experienced a moment of unaccountable stillness, a blankness, a pause in time so complete that something else can step in. People who've seen the hospital often recall moments like these just before it, sitting in a car long after it's parked, standing in a hallway unable to remember why they walked there, staring into a mirror without recognizing what they see. They claim the hospital senses those cracks in awareness and opens its doors at just the right angle. Inside, time does not behave. Patients have reported being treated for conditions that had not yet been diagnosed. Just one man emerged after a supposed visit to St. Idalia with his appendix already removed, though he had felt no pain prior and no scar was present. A woman claimed she had gone there with a broken wrist, but left with a healed arm and 3 months of memories she did not recognize. Conversations with nurses, dreams of other patients, moments of joy and grief she swore weren't hers. And yet none of these people can find the hospital again.
Hindas.
They drive back.
GPS.
They walk the woods. They return to the road at the same time of night.
TS.
But the sign never appears. The road never opens. The name fades from the edge of their consciousness like a dream receding into dawn. Only one thing remains constant. When they close their eyes, they remember room numbers, not random ones.
GS.
Always the same: 102, 304, 515. And they remember someone else in those rooms, waiting, calling, not with a voice but with a thought shaped like longing.
GS.
No record of St. Idalia Medical Center exists in state or national registries. No photographs have ever been authenticated. No blueprints, no permit history. But sometimes, in the mist-heavy silence of a late drive on Interstate 40, a faint glow appears between the trees. A flicker, like a beacon blinking beneath layers of dust and rain.
GS.
If you happen to glance to the right and catch sight of that old yellowed sign, pull over if you want, step out of the car, walk into the woods and follow the curve of the land. But be careful, you may not find the hospital, or worse, it may find you. And once you're admitted, your discharge is never guaranteed. Part 23. The Siren in the Sewers. In the early spring of 1993, the town of Gresham Falls, a small community nestled deep in the valley woodlands of Pennsylvania, began to experience a slow, creeping change in atmosphere. It wasn't weather-related. It wasn't economic. On the surface, everything remained ordinary. Families kept their routines, the school year rolled on, and Sunday morning sermons continued without interruption. But in quiet moments, residents would stop, look up from their plates, or pause mid-sentence and tilt their heads, suddenly distracted by something they couldn't quite place. A feeling, faint but persistent, like being watched by something that wasn't above them or behind them, but beneath them. It began with sounds, low and distant, barely perceptible, like a song played from the far end of a tunnel. It came mostly at night, though some swore they could hear it humming, even during the day when the rain softened the air and the wind stilled. The sound was not threatening. In fact, it was oddly beautiful, melancholic, the kind of melody that feels familiar before you realize you've never heard it. Some residents described it as a woman's voice, though no words were ever clear, just vowel sounds that floated upward through drains and manhole covers, too soft to follow, but too distinct to dismiss. At first, people dismissed it as pipe resonance, the echoes of shifting groundwater or the hum of distant machinery. But over time, the melody became more structured, rhythmic, a pattern that seemed to repeat on a cycle, always beginning just after midnight and fading out near 3 a.m. Some teenagers tried recording it with handheld cassette players, but the tapes never caught the sound, only the background hiss of static, and sometimes a low pulse that made the speakers vibrate like a heartbeat. Then the dreams began. At first, they were harmless, vivid but forgettable. People reported walking down stone corridors they didn't recognize, or stepping barefoot into shallow water lit by a dim blue glow. But eventually, more specific details emerged, nearly identical ones. People began to dream of standing in circular rooms, the walls lined with wet brick, with water rising slowly around their ankles. They saw a figure in the distance, a woman waist deep in the dark, her head tilted as if listening for them. Her mouth never moved, but the song always came from somewhere close. Some woke gasping, their throats dry, a lingering taste of copper at the back of their tongues. A few even woke with mud beneath their fingernails, despite their beds being clean and undisturbed. The town's utility department was called in. They sent a team of inspectors to investigate the main sewer lines, thinking perhaps there was a fault in the infrastructure. The men descended into the tunnels with portable lights and radios, and at first, everything appeared normal. But several hundred yards beneath the northern section of town, the crew discovered an old service chamber, one that didn't appear on any of their maps. The stonework was older than the rest of the system, much older, likely predating the town itself. Though no historical records mention such a structure, it was shaped like a dome, 30 feet across, with concentric steps leading down into a basin filled with still black water. There were carvings along the walls, not letters, but symbols, swirls and curves that followed the geometry of the chamber, each line echoing the next like ripples. At the center of the chamber, anchored into the stone by rusted bolts, was a narrow iron grate. The team leader approached it, leaned in, and said later that he felt something pulling at the sound around him. Not air, not movement, just pressure, like his voice had been swallowed by the dark below. They left without taking samples. That night, one of the inspectors woke screaming. His wife found him huddled in the bathtub, sobbing and soaked with sweat, insisting he was still down there. He couldn't explain what that meant, just that there was water and music and something behind the grate that had been listening. He couldn't remember seeing it, but he knew absolutely that it had seen him. Within a week, 2 more members of the crew had gone missing. Their cars were found parked near manhole access points, the lids removed, ladders descending into dark. No notes, no struggle, just absence. The town council shut down the investigation. The service chamber was sealed with concrete. They told the public it was a matter of safety, that the structure was unstable, nothing more. But the song never stopped. If anything, it grew louder, more vivid. Now people were hearing it outside their homes. In the fields, in the woods that bordered the town, children reported hearing humming beneath the swings in the schoolyard. A gas station clerk claimed he found a trail of wet footprints leading from a storm drain to the front counter, though no one had entered. He quit that same night. The final incident occurred in October. A young girl named Elise, aged 10, vanished from her bedroom during a thunderstorm. Her parents had left a baby monitor in her room to check for nightmares. When the recording was played back, it captured the storm, the occasional creak of the house, and then at 2:14 a.m., a soft melody, wordless, mournful, impossibly close. Elise could be heard whispering, "I hear her now," followed by the sound of bedsheets shifting and the patter of bare feet on floorboards. The last thing on the tape was a wet drip, followed by a voice not belonging to the girl, whispering something unintelligible in a tone that was neither kind nor cruel, just ancient. They never found her. After that, the town changed. People began to leave. The ones who stayed learned to close their drains at night, to muffle their sinks and bathtubs with towels. No one walked near storm grates after dark. A few still reported hearing the music, but only once. It never repeated itself for the same person, as if whatever was singing was looking for something specific, and once it realized you weren't the one, it moved on. But if it thinks you are, there's a story now, a warning. They say if you find yourself alone, somewhere silent, and you hear music rising from below, soft and sorrowful and sweet, don't follow it. Don't lean closer. Don't listen too carefully, because it's not calling to you, it's remembering you. And memory in the deep doesn't let go.
Part 24. The woman who walked out of the lake. In the summer of 1982, just outside of Colson, Minnesota, a group of campers reported seeing something or someone rise out of Lake Merrow at dusk. The lake was small, not well known, and tucked into a horseshoe of dense pine and birch forest. It wasn't deep, maybe 15 feet at its center, and it had no known currents or significant wildlife activity. Locals swam in it often. Families fished off its modest dock. It was calm, reliable, and above all, ordinary. But on the evening of July 13th, the ordinary slipped. The sun had just dipped below the treetops when the group, 7 people, mostly high school friends visiting home for the summer, noticed something dark floating in the center of the lake. At first, they assumed it was debris, maybe a fallen log, but it was moving, not drifting, advancing, slowly, deliberately, in a straight line toward the shore. They watched in silence as the shape broke the surface, and resolved itself into the unmistakable outline of a woman. She moved with eerie precision, no splashing, no stumbling, just a slow gliding motion, as though the lake's resistance did not apply to her. Her clothing was strange, a dress made of thick grey fabric, soaked and clinging to her skin, with sleeves that hung like curtains past her hands. Her hair was long and slicked straight back, black as oil, and her skin was pale to the point of translucence. But the most unnerving part was her face. No one could recall its exact features. Each witness gave different descriptions later. Some said her eyes were too large, others remembered no eyes at all, some said she was smiling, others swore her lips never moved. The only thing they agreed on was the feeling she brought with her. Not fear, not danger, recognition. As if they had all in some small way seen her before, she stepped onto the muddy shore without leaving footprints, and walked straight past the group without acknowledging them. None of them moved, none of them spoke. One of the girls said later she felt a buzzing in her jaw, like her teeth were vibrating. Another remembered the smell of salt water. Though Merrow had never been connected to the sea, the woman disappeared into the trees on the eastern side of the lake. They waited for hours, but she never came back. They might have dismissed it as a shared hallucination, a trick of the light or mass suggestion, but the following morning, someone found her footprints, a perfect trail from the lake's edge into the woods, not deep enough to match a full-grown woman's weight, and spaced at odd intervals, as though she didn't walk so much as touch down. The trail ended 20 feet into the trees. No more prints, no sign of departure, no broken branches, as if she had simply ceased to exist beyond that point. The campers tried to report it. Park rangers dismissed it immediately. A prank, most likely, kids trying to stir up a ghost story for the next wave of summer tourists. But the town took notice. Quietly, some of the older residents had heard the tale before. Whispers of a woman who rose from water, not because she drowned, but because she waited. According to the oldest versions, she appears every few decades to walk a path she never finished in life. Not a haunting, a completion, but those who see her aren't chosen at random. One by one, the campers began to change. It started subtly. One lost time during conversations, brief stretches of 10 or 15 seconds where they would go blank and then snap back with no memory of what was said. Another began writing in her sleep, strange phrases in tight loops, always ending with the same line, "I found the bottom." A third began avoiding mirrors entirely, refusing to explain why but visibly shaken every time he caught his reflection. By the end of August, 2 of the group had left town. One moved states without warning, cutting contact entirely. The other began experiencing recurring nosebleeds and refused to go near water, even bath water, convinced he would be pulled through. He didn't elaborate on what that meant. Then in early September, a maintenance worker at the lake discovered something lodged between the stones at the shallow end. A single leather shoe, grey with age, waterlogged but intact. Inside was a tag, the ink almost entirely faded. Only one word was legible: Idella. The name sparked something in the town's historical society. A quick search through the archives revealed a woman named Idella Vance, listed as missing in 1911. She had been 27 at the time, last seen walking toward the lake on a foggy morning. Witnesses said she seemed confused but calm, humming to herself as she disappeared into the trees. No body was ever recovered. The town assumed suicide, though no note was found. Her family left soon after, and her name faded into obscurity. The resemblance between the archived photograph of Idella and the descriptions given by the campers was uncanny. The same long hair, the same blank expression, the same strange dress, even down to the oversized sleeves. And while photography from that time was limited, her eyes, dark, almost black, were unmistakable. What unsettled everyone most was the date of her disappearance. July 13th, the same night she was seen walking out of the lake. 71 years later, locals began referring to her only as the Lake Walker. She wasn't spoken of as a ghost or a revenant, but as something else entirely, a memory that moves. Not tied to grief, but to ritual. They said the lake wasn't deep because it didn't have to be. It was wide enough to hide time, and that was what she crossed when she came. Not distance, time. The campers never returned to Merrow. Most left the state.
One was later institutionalized for sleepwalking into strangers' homes, always muttering the same phrase as he stood at their foot of their beds. "You don't remember, but she does." Another was found living in a trailer outside of Tallahassee, completely alone, with dozens of sketches taped to his walls. All showed the same figure, gray dress, black hair, rising from water with arms outstretched. In each drawing, her face was blank, except for one, where the artist had drawn her mouth open wide, and instead of teeth, she had mirrors behind her lips. To this day, Lake Merrow remains open to the public. Fishing permits are issued each season. The dock was rebuilt in 2006, but ask the local rangers, and they'll advise you not to stay past dusk. They won't say why, they'll just shrug and tell you the mist comes in fast, and the trails are easy to lose when the dark falls. But if you press harder, if you look closely at the old signs posted near the tree line, you might see one still bears the original language from decades ago. "Do not approach the woman if she walks. She is not walking to you, she is walking through you." Part 25. The radio that shouldn't broadcast in a forgotten corner of Nevada's Great Basin, where the land folds into cracked salt and dry wind rattles through Joshua trees like bones in a jar. There's a place called Delver Hollow. It isn't marked on most maps anymore, and even locals who live within 50 miles speak of it only in vague terms. A dip in the landscape, a flat, windless stretch of brushland where cars occasionally stall and compasses spin in lazy, uncertain loops. There are no homes there, no power lines, no sign of anyone ever living in that pale dust bowl. But for over 40 years, an AM radio signal has been heard coming from its center, and no one knows who, if anyone, is behind the microphone. The first known report came from a long-haul trucker named Mason Trent in 1981. According to his logbook, he was driving along Route 722 when his radio, tuned to a Las Vegas sports station, abruptly cut to static. He didn't think much of it. Desert terrain often caused interference. But then from beneath the hiss, a voice emerged. Quiet, monotone, female, speaking slowly, with a calm precision that seemed almost detached from human cadence. The words weren't advertisements or weather reports. She wasn't reading the news. Instead, she recited names, one by one. No commentary, no explanation. Just a list, like a teacher taking roll in a classroom without students. At first, Mason assumed it was part of some emergency broadcast system. But as the list continued, he recognized one of the names. It was his sister's. She had died 2 years prior in a boating accident off the Oregon coast. He pulled over, shaken, and tried to write down the names as they came. He captured 9 before the signal faded. He later learned that 3 of the other names belonged to people confirmed deceased within the last 5 years. None were public figures. None had been in the news. But they had all in some way died suddenly, quietly. And in each case, their families would later report experiencing strange disturbances around the time of the broadcast, phones ringing without caller ID, mirrors fogging without heat, or radios turning on by themselves in the middle of the night, always tuned to the lowest end of the AM dial. After Mason came others. A woman driving east through the hollow in 1985 claimed her dashboard radio flickered to life despite the car being completely shut off. The battery had died, and yet the speakers crackled and hummed with a soft voice counting slowly in a language she didn't recognize, some hybrid of Latin and something harsher, older. Another man, a drifter camping near the basin's edge in 1990, claimed to hear music playing from the soil itself, an old jazz standard he remembered from childhood. He followed the sound for 2 hours until he found, half buried in salt and dust, a radio that had no batteries inside. The music cut off the moment he picked it up. But the most disturbing account came from a retired ham radio operator named Ernest Calley, who lived in the area during the late 1990s. Ernest was meticulous, scientific, and skeptical by nature. He documented the signal from Delver Hollow over a span of 13 months, tracing its frequency fluctuations, bandwidth anomalies, and atmospheric interference patterns. According to his notes, the signal operated exclusively between 1440 and 1443 kHz, though it would sometimes vanish entirely for weeks. When it returned, the voice was always the same, calm, unemotional, female. He called her the broadcaster. What haunted Ernest wasn't just the voice or the content. It was the way she spoke. She never used articles, never said or the. Her sentences were stripped of natural rhythm, devoid of personality. And yet, every once in a while, she would say something that sounded intimately familiar. A street name only used in Ernest's childhood neighborhood. The name of a dog he had once owned, never mentioned aloud in decades. And once, only once, she said his full name, slowly, followed by a single word, pending. Ernest stopped recording after that. Years later, his nephew found the tapes hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the shack where Ernest had lived. He played them back, expecting to hear fragments of desert interference, but what came through was a steady stream of audio, perfectly preserved. The voice was there, crisp, undisturbed, and about halfway through the final reel, the recording grew silent for almost a minute. Then the voice returned, this time distorted, not by interference, but by something stranger. Slower, like it was stretching itself to fill the space. It said, "You're listening because you remember. You're hearing because you were forgotten." Then the audio cut off permanently. There have been attempts to trace the signal's origin. The FCC has no license or record for any transmission from that area. Mobile triangulation yields nothing conclusive. Satellites show no towers, no buried lines. Nothing. The frequency shouldn't be possible from such a remote, unpowered location, and yet, the signal continues. What makes the Delver Hollow broadcasts unique is not their consistency, but their intention. Listeners describe a strange compulsion to keep tuning in, not curiosity, longing, like they are waiting to hear something they've forgotten was missing. Some feel like they've been told a secret in reverse. Others report auditory hallucinations hours after turning the dial, whispers in the space between dreams, low tones woven into the sound of wind, or the hum of refrigerators that suddenly form syllables if you listen long enough. One consistent element is the final phrase. Every transmission, regardless of its content, ends the same way. This is not a broadcast, this is a return. No one knows what it means. But more than one person has written down those words in their sleep, found scribbled on napkins, bathroom mirrors, fogged windows, without remembering doing so. Some believe the broadcaster is not speaking from the present, but from a fixed moment outside of time. That Delver Hollow is not a place, but a leak, where the dead transmit echoes forward, not for comfort or closure, but to reclaim something. Whatever it is, the signal continues. Even today, if you drive through that dead stretch of the basin after midnight, tune your radio to 1440 AM. Wait. You may hear only static, you may hear silence, but if the air around you changes, if the temperature drops suddenly, or your hands begin to tremble without cause, listen closely. You might hear a voice reciting your name, and when she does, it won't be a warning. It will be a reminder. Part 26. The House at the End of Elsewhere Street. There is a neighborhood on the outskirts of a town you've never heard of. Maybe it's tucked behind a railroad overpass, or perhaps it sits just beyond where your GPS signal flickers and dies. The town itself is nothing remarkable. An old gas station with flickering signage, a diner where no one talks above a whisper, a hardware store that still sells glass fuses and doesn't accept cards. But down a road called Elsewhere Street, just past the last working street lamp, sits a house that doesn't show up on tax records, phone books, or county blueprints. And the people who walk past it during the day don't remember ever seeing it at night. The house isn't abandoned. That's important to understand. It isn't boarded up or covered in graffiti. Its windows aren't broken, and its porch doesn't sag. In fact, it always looks maintained. The grass remains trimmed, though no one sees a mower. The mailbox never overflows. Sometimes a porch light is on, sometimes not. The curtains shift, even when there's no wind. And yet no one lives there, or if someone does, they don't use the front door. The house itself is 2 stories tall, painted a dusky green that seems to shift hues depending on the weather. Its windows are older than the rest of the houses on the street, too narrow, with wooden frames that look hand-cut. The second floor has one window that is always dark, even when every other light in the house is glowing. This window does not reflect anything. Not trees, not the sky, not your own face if you walk close enough to look, especially not your own face. There are stories, of course. Every small town has a place like that. An oddity, a hushed rumor passed around high schoolers on long walks home. But with this house, the stories are always the same. No matter who tells them, they say you don't find it the first time. You might pass it once, glance at it, and think nothing of it. A weird old place, sure, but nothing worth remembering. It isn't until later days or weeks, or even years,
when you're walking down Elsewhere Street again, that you feel it. That uncanny skip in your perception, like a song you know skipping half a beat. And when you look up, there it is, not looming, not hiding, just waiting. And then the dreams begin. People who've seen the house more than once describe nearly identical dreams, always beginning the same way, standing on the porch in silence, hand hovering near the door but never quite touching it. Behind the door, the sound of footsteps, slow, steady, pacing just out of reach. The door never opens, the dream never ends violently. It just stretches. Some say it feels like hours. Others say they wake up not knowing how long they were asleep, their limbs aching like they've been standing too long. One man, a postal worker who lived 4 blocks away, reported having the dream every night for 2 weeks after a new route took him past the house. By the 3rd night, he started waking up with soil under his fingernails. By the 5th, his feet were dirty. By the 10th, his wife insisted she saw him sleepwalking, standing outside on their front lawn, barefoot, muttering the same phrase over and over. "It's almost ready." She asked him what it meant. He didn't remember saying anything. He was last seen on a Tuesday morning walking down Elsewhere Street alone. No mailbag, no uniform, just walking toward the house with his eyes half closed. The security camera from a neighbor across the street caught him stepping off the sidewalk and onto the lawn, pausing at the foot of the steps and looking up toward the 2nd-story window. Then the camera glitched. When it resumed 4 seconds later, he was gone. There was no door slam, no flicker of movement inside the house, just stillness. The porch was empty, the lawn untouched, but the 2nd-story window was glowing faintly now, like something warm had just entered the room. The footage was never shared publicly. The neighbor moved a month later. Occasionally, someone will claim they knocked on the door. Some say they heard voices inside, soft and rhythmic like chanting behind glass. Others say no sound came at all, but the door unlocked itself with an audible click the moment they raised their hand. No one who has claimed to step inside ever described it the same way. One said it was a single circular room that spiraled downward instead of up. Another swore the inside was a mirror of their childhood home, but with details subtly wrong. Furniture just slightly off. Family photos featuring people they didn't recognize. A television that played static laced with whispers that stopped if you got too close. A woman who disappeared in 2007 left a note pinned to her apartment wall. It was written in pencil, but not in her handwriting. The message was short and disturbing. "There's no furniture, just skin, hung like curtains. No body was ever found." There's a theory among the more obsessive locals. They call the house a hinge, not a portal, not a haunting, but a point of articulation, where reality folds, where versions of the world grind against each other like tectonic plates. They believe the house doesn't just exist here, but everywhere. That sometimes, if you look long enough at the building's angles, you can see them shimmering, split seconds of staircases that aren't there, lights that blink on when no bulb is present. Some claim to have seen their own silhouette in the 2nd-floor window, moving before they do, watching them with patient familiarity. The town doesn't talk about it anymore. People who remember it try not to say the address aloud. They cross the street rather than walk past it. The street light closest to it never stays lit for more than 2 nights. No matter how many times the bulb is replaced, it always burns out again. The house isn't abandoned. It never was. It's just waiting for the right kind of attention. And when it gets it, when someone really sees it, not just with their eyes, but with the part of their mind that understands wrongness without words, it begins to open. Not all at once, just a crack, just wide enough to let something out, or something in. Part 27. The forest that swallows sound. There is a stretch of forest in northern Maine that does not appear strange on a map. It occupies the same square mileage it always has, bordered by faded county lines and a logging road so narrow and unmaintained it's mostly forgotten, except by deer hunters and the occasional ranger. To look at it, it's like any other forest in that part of the world, dense with birch and pine, littered with stones and cold moss, crossed by shallow streams that run copper with iron and dead leaves. The air smells like sap and old earth. The birds are few but present. The wind moves through the canopy the way it always does, and yet no one who has stepped too deeply into those trees has ever described it the same way afterward. Some do not describe it at all. They call it the silencing wood. Not officially, not on paper, but that's the name that passes between rangers over coffee and is whispered at campgrounds when children have finally gone to bed.
The origin of the name, like most things about the forest, is unclear, but the phenomenon itself is consistent. Walk a mile in, past the painted boundary trees and the decaying remnants of old survey flags, and something changes. The air grows heavier, not in temperature or smell, but in pressure, as if the world itself has drawn a breath and is holding it. And then the sound begins to vanish. Not all at once, not with drama or finality. It fades with indifference, like a fading signal. First the wind, then the birds, then your own footsteps, which stop crunching the underbrush beneath you and instead seem to land in silence, as if the ground no longer echoes. Your breathing becomes distant. Your voice, if you try it, comes out flat, muffled, swallowed, like shouting into a thick curtain. Even the crack of twigs, or the slap of a hand against bark, feels muted, the impact missing its punctuation. The deeper you go, the quieter the world becomes. Until it's not just quiet, it's absent. Those who have returned from that part of the forest, and there are not many, report something stranger than silence. They speak of a sound that was supposed to be there, a low subliminal hum just beneath the threshold of hearing, like a memory of sound still echoing in the bones. The kind of emptiness that isn't quiet, but unfinished, like a note held too long, waiting for resolution. One hiker, a former Navy sonar technician, described it as a dead frequency, the sensation of being inside a pressure pocket designed to erase your presence. Another said it more simply: it felt like the forest was pretending not to notice me. The first documented disappearance in the silencing wood dates back to 1949. A biology student from Dartmouth had been conducting bird counts in the area and failed to return. His equipment was later found stacked neatly beneath a tree: binoculars, notebook, compass, and canteen. No signs of struggle, no signs of wildlife activity. His last journal entry, scrawled hastily on the margin of a page, read, "No birds, no echo, trees feel wrong." His body was never recovered. Since then, the disappearances have continued. Not frequent, but consistent. A hunter in 1967, 2 hikers in 1983, a pair of amateur cryptid researchers in 2004 who posted a series of videos online before vanishing entirely. Their final upload was a static-filled shot of pine trees from a low angle. In the last 3 seconds, the frame shakes slightly, as if the person holding the camera turned sharply, and a distorted glitch-like pop interrupts the audio. Then nothing. The video is still online. No one has been able to replicate the location from the footage. A theory has emerged among those who study liminal phenomena. The forest is not just muting sound, it's muting recognition. That once you reach a certain depth, your connection to the external world begins to fray, not through violence or hallucination, but through a slow and total erasure of relevance. One researcher described it as a spatial disassociation event, in which the land itself begins to behave like a misfiring memory. That might explain the object reports. On occasion, hikers have left markers, bright cloths, radio beacons, even carved signs, only to find them relocated upon return. Not destroyed, just moved, as if someone else is tidying behind them, curating their path, slowly rewriting it until they forget which direction they came from. There are older stories too, ones that predate the disappearances. Local Wabanaki folklore speaks of a place in the northern woods where sound was forbidden because of what it might wake. A being or presence, not a creature, not a god, that lives beneath the skin of the forest and breathes in stillness. The old name, long forgotten outside oral tradition, translates roughly to the sleeper that hears with roots. Some versions claim the forest was once louder, but something happened. An event, a breach, a question that was asked too loudly. And since then the forest has enforced quiet, not as punishment, as protection. From what, no one is certain. In recent years, a few drone explorers have tried to map the region. Most return with nothing but silent footage of trees. One, however, returned with data showing a sound dip so severe that it actually flattened the drone's internal audio processing. When the footage was reviewed, there was no sound, not even motor noise. But during one segment, a shadow crossed the canopy, not an animal, not a bird, a shape that moved too slowly, too smoothly. And then it was gone. The pilot never flew again. He now refuses to speak on the record. Today there are no warning signs near the silencing wood. No fences, no patrols. It's not protected because it's not acknowledged. The forest is simply allowed to remain. people avoid it now not because of fear, but because of something more primal, the instinct to not disturb a room where something has been left sleeping. If you ever find yourself walking in a northern forest and notice the quiet shift, if the birds vanish mid-song and the wind no longer whispers through the trees, and your own breath begins to sound like it's trapped inside your skull, turn back, even if the path seems unchanged, even if the trees look kind, because once the forest forgets your name, it stops letting you speak, and eventually you won't even remember how.
Part 26. The House at the End of Elsewhere Street. There is a neighborhood on the outskirts of a town you've never heard of. Maybe it's tucked behind a railroad overpass, or perhaps it sits just beyond where your GPS signal flickers and dies. The town itself is nothing remarkable. An old gas station with flickering signage, a diner where no one talks above a whisper, a hardware store that still sells glass fuses and doesn't accept cards. But down a road called Elsewhere Street, just past the last working street lamp, sits a house that doesn't show up on tax records, phone books, or county blueprints. And the people who walk past it during the day don't remember ever seeing it at night. The house isn't abandoned. That's important to understand. It isn't boarded up or covered in graffiti. Its windows aren't broken, and its porch doesn't sag. In fact, it always looks maintained. The grass remains trimmed, though no one sees a mower. The mailbox never overflows. Sometimes a porch light is on, sometimes not. The curtains shift, even when there's no wind. And yet no one lives there, or if someone does, they don't use the front door. The house itself is 2 stories tall, painted a dusky green that seems to shift hues depending on the weather. Its windows are older than the rest of the houses on the street, too narrow, with wooden frames that look hand-cut. The second floor has one window that is always dark, even when every other light in the house is glowing. This window does not reflect anything. Not trees, not the sky, not your own face if you walk close enough to look, especially not your own face. There are stories, of course. Every small town has a place like that. An oddity, a hushed rumor passed around high schoolers on long walks home. But with this house, the stories are always the same. No matter who tells them, they say you don't find it the first time. You might pass it once, glance at it, and think nothing of it. A weird old place, sure, but nothing worth remembering. It isn't until later days or weeks, or even years, when you're walking down Elsewhere Street again, that you feel it. That uncanny skip in your perception, like a song you know skipping half a beat. And when you look up, there it is, not looming, not hiding, just waiting. And then the dreams begin. People who've seen the house more than once describe nearly identical dreams, always beginning the same way. Standing on the porch in silence, hand hovering near the door but never quite touching it. Behind the door, the sound of footsteps, slow, steady pacing just out of reach. The door never opens. The dream never ends violently. It just stretches. Some say it feels like hours. Others say they wake up not knowing how long they were asleep, their limbs aching like they've been standing too long. One man, a postal worker who lived 4 blocks away, reported having the dream every night for 2 weeks after a new route took him past the house. By the 3rd night, he started waking up with soil under his fingernails. By the 5th, his feet were dirty. By the 10th, his wife insisted she saw him sleepwalking, standing outside on their front lawn, barefoot, muttering the same phrase over and over. "It's almost ready." She asked him what it meant. He didn't remember saying anything. He was last seen on a Tuesday morning walking down Elsewhere Street alone. No mailbag, no uniform, just walking toward the house with his eyes half closed. The security camera from a neighbor across the street caught him stepping off the sidewalk and onto the lawn, pausing at the foot of the steps and looking up toward the 2nd-story window. Then the camera glitched. When it resumed 4 seconds later, he was gone. There was no door slam, no flicker of movement inside the house, just stillness. The porch was empty, the lawn untouched, but the 2nd-story window was glowing faintly now, like something warm had just entered the room. The footage was never shared publicly. The neighbor moved a month later. Occasionally, someone will claim they knocked on the door. Some say they heard voices inside, soft and rhythmic like chanting behind glass. Others say no sound came at all, but the door unlocked itself with an audible click the moment they raised their hand. No one who has claimed to step inside ever described it the same way. One said it was a single circular room that spiraled downward instead of up. Another swore the inside was a mirror of their childhood home, but with details subtly wrong. Furniture just slightly off.
family photos featuring people they didn't recognize, a television that played static laced with whispers that stopped if you got too close. A woman who disappeared in 2007 left a note pinned to her apartment wall. It was written in pencil, but not in her handwriting. The message was short and disturbing. There's no furniture, just skin, hung like curtains. No body was ever found. There's a theory among the more obsessive locals. They call the house a hinge, not a portal, not a haunting, but a point of articulation, where reality folds, where versions of the world grind against each other like tectonic plates. They believe the house doesn't just exist here, but everywhere. That sometimes, if you look long enough at the building's angles, you can see them shimmering, split seconds of staircases that aren't there, lights that blink on when no bulb is present. Some claim to have seen their own silhouette in the second-floor window, moving before they do, watching them with patient familiarity. The town doesn't talk about it anymore. People who remember it try not to say the address aloud. They cross the street rather than walk past it. The streetlight closest to it never stays lit for more than 2 nights. No matter how many times the bulb is replaced, it always burns out again. The house isn't abandoned. It never was. It's just waiting for the right kind of attention. And when it gets it, when someone really sees it, not just with their eyes, but with the part of their mind that understands wrongness without words, it begins to open. Not all at once, just a crack, just wide enough to let something out, or something in. Part 27. The forest that swallows sound. There is a stretch of forest in northern Maine that does not appear strange on a map. It occupies the same square mileage it always has, bordered by faded county lines and a logging road so narrow and unmaintained it's mostly forgotten, except by deer hunters and the occasional ranger. To look at it, it's like any other forest in that part of the world, dense with birch and pine, littered with stones and cold moss, crossed by shallow streams that run copper with iron and dead leaves. The air smells like sap and old earth. The birds are few but present. The wind moves through the canopy the way it always does, and yet no one who has stepped too deeply into those trees has ever described it the same way afterward. Some do not describe it at all. They call it the silencing wood. Not officially, not on paper, but that's the name that passes between rangers over coffee and is whispered at campgrounds when children have finally gone to bed. The origin of the name, like most things about the forest, is unclear, but the phenomenon itself is consistent. Walk a mile in, past the painted boundary trees and the decaying remnants of old survey flags, and something changes. The air grows heavier, not in temperature or smell, but in pressure, as if the world itself has drawn a breath and is holding it. And then the sound begins to vanish. Not all at once, not with drama or finality. It fades with indifference, like a fading signal. First the wind, then the birds, then your own footsteps, which stop crunching the underbrush beneath you and instead seem to land in silence, as if the ground no longer echoes. Your breathing becomes distant. Your voice, if you try it, comes out flat, muffled, swallowed, like shouting into a thick curtain. Even the crack of twigs, or the slap of a hand against bark feels muted, the impact missing its punctuation. The deeper you go, the quieter the world becomes. Until it's not just quiet, it's absent. Those who have returned from that part of the forest, and there are not many, report something stranger than silence. They speak of a sound that was supposed to be there, a low subliminal hum just beneath the threshold of hearing, like a memory of sound still echoing in the bones. The kind of emptiness that isn't quiet, but unfinished, like a note held too long, waiting for resolution. One hiker, a former Navy sonar technician, described it as a dead frequency, the sensation of being inside a pressure pocket designed to erase your presence. Another said it more simply: it felt like the forest was pretending not to notice me. The first documented disappearance in the silencing wood dates back to 1949. A biology student from Dartmouth had been conducting bird counts in the area and failed to return. His equipment was later found stacked neatly beneath a tree: binoculars, notebook, compass, and canteen. No signs of struggle, no signs of wildlife activity. His last journal entry, scrawled hastily on the margin of a page, read, "No birds, no echo, trees feel wrong." His body was never recovered. Since then the disappearances have continued. Not frequent, but consistent. A hunter in 1967, 2 hikers in 1983, a pair of amateur cryptid researchers in 2004 who posted a series of videos online before vanishing entirely. Their final upload was a static-filled shot of pine trees from a low angle. In the last 3 seconds, the frame shakes slightly, as if the person holding the camera turned sharply, and a distorted glitch-like pop interrupts the audio. Then nothing. The video is still online. No one has been able to replicate the location from the footage. A theory has emerged among those who study liminal phenomena. The forest is not just muting sound, it's muting recognition. That once you reach a certain depth, your connection to the external world begins to fray, not through violence or hallucination, but through a slow and total erasure of relevance. One researcher described it as a spatial disassociation event, in which the land itself begins to behave like a misfiring memory. That might explain the object reports. On occasion, hikers have left markers, bright cloths, radio beacons, even carved signs, only to find them relocated upon return. Not destroyed, just moved, as if someone else is tidying behind them, curating their path, slowly rewriting it until they forget which direction they came from. There are older stories too, ones that predate the disappearances. Local Wabanaki folklore speaks of a place in the northern woods where sound was forbidden because of what it might wake. A being or presence, not a creature, not a god, that lives beneath the skin of the forest and breathes in stillness. The old name, long forgotten outside oral tradition, translates roughly to the sleeper that hears with roots. Some versions claim the forest was once louder, but something happened. An event, a breach, a question that was asked too loudly. And since then the forest has enforced quiet, not as punishment, as protection. From what no one is certain. In recent years, a few drone explorers have tried to map the region. Most return with nothing but silent footage of trees. One, however, returned with data showing a sound dip. If you ever find yourself walking in a northern forest and notice the quiet shift, if the birds vanish mid-song, and the wind no longer whispers through the trees, and your own breath begins to sound like it's trapped inside your skull, turn back, even if the path seems unchanged, even if the trees look kind, because once the forest forgets your name, it stops letting you speak, and eventually you won't even remember how.
Part 28. The phone booth that rings at night. In a narrow valley outside of Claremont, Washington, surrounded by thick mist and pine, there stands a single phone booth that no one remembers installing. It's not near a gas station or on any visible utility line. It isn't listed in public directories or found in records from the phone company. There is no identifying number etched into its metal. It stands alone at the base of a small incline near the tree line, half swallowed by wild grass. Its glass panels streaked with condensation, even on dry days. At a glance, it appears broken. The cord hangs loose. The receiver is old, yellowing. There are cobwebs in the corners, but on some nights just after 3 a.m., the phone rings. And if you're close enough to hear it, it's already too late. The first known report came from a man named Edgar Foster in 1994, a substitute teacher and amateur photographer. He was hiking alone with his dog in the pre-dawn dark, trying to catch the early light on a ridge above the tree line, when he claimed to have heard a ringing phone somewhere down in the valley. The sound shouldn't have traveled as far as it did. It was faint, but unnaturally clear, like it was being piped directly into his ear. He assumed it must be coming from a ranger station or a cabin, but when he descended and followed the sound, he found only the booth, still ringing. He later described the experience in a letter never mailed. It was cold, but the receiver felt warm, like it had just been used. I didn't want to touch it. I did anyway. The moment I put it to my ear, it stopped ringing, and then I heard myself. Not an echo, not a recording, my voice. A conversation I don't remember having, but I recognized it instantly. It was me, asking a question I hadn't asked yet. He never said what the question was. Edgar was reported missing 3 weeks later. His car was found pulled off a service road nearby, keys still in the ignition. His tent had been packed away. His camera was missing one roll of film. A single photo was left in the developed batch, an image of the booth at night, lit faintly by a single beam of moonlight. In the reflection on the glass door, someone was standing inside, but the booth was locked when investigators arrived. No footprints, no signs of recent use. No fingerprints except Edgar's. Since then, the stories have multiplied. The booth doesn't appear on satellite images. Walk a route during the day and it won't be there. Leaves, impossibly direct. It calls you down, and you follow. The path changes each time.
One hiker swore she walked through a ravine that wasn't there the next morning. Another said he passed 5 tree stumps in a row that bled sap the color of rust. The way back is never the way in, and no one remembers taking the last step into the clearing. You only realize you've arrived once the booth is standing in front of you, already ringing, already waiting. The calls are never the same. One woman heard her daughter's voice, except her daughter had never been born. A man in 2009 answered and listened to a conversation in a language he didn't know but somehow understood, only to later discover he could speak fragments of it in dreams. A teenager swore the booth played music from a song he'd written but never shared, with lyrics describing events he hadn't yet experienced. Another claimed the booth didn't ring at all, but when he stepped inside, the receiver was already off the hook. When he lifted it, he heard a voice that simply said, "Thank you, that's all we needed." Then the line went dead. No two experiences are identical, but everyone agrees on 3 things. First, you always hear something personal, something meant for you, and only you. Second, if you try to record it, audio, video, even writing down what's said, it fails. Devices glitch, batteries drain. The moment you try to document the booth, the details begin to unravel in your memory. The exact words fade. The tone of the voice blurs. You're left with only the certainty that you were changed by what you heard, even if you can no longer say how. And third, you only get one call. Those who try to return never find the booth again. No matter how hard they search, no matter how long they stay awake in the forest, waiting for that ring to return, it never does. You could sleep beside the hill where it once stood. You could scream into the trees, beg to hear that voice again, but it won't come back. Some believe it only calls when you're approaching a threshold, a moment of divergence in your life so thin, so fragile, that a single word might tip the future into a different shape. Others think the booth doesn't just call to warn, but to confirm, to deliver a version of the world that was already decided, one last time, before the door quietly closes behind you. A few theorists whisper darker ideas that the booth doesn't give information, but takes it, that it isn't there to help at all, it's there to listen. A ranger once joked that if you answer the phone, you're just telling something exactly where you are. He laughed when he said it. He didn't laugh when he stopped showing up to work 2 weeks later. His truck was found on the edge of the valley with the driver's door open. A notebook lay on the passenger seat with the words, "I shouldn't have picked up." You can still hike near the valley if you're brave. There's no law against it. No warning sign. No electric fence or silent government vehicle parked down the road. Just an empty place on the map where people sometimes vanish from their lives, like stones disappearing into water. And if you hear a phone ringing in the trees, distant, insistent, lonely, ask yourself what question has been waiting at the edge of your thoughts all this time. The one you've never said out loud, then ask yourself if you're ready to hear the answer. Because the call is coming, and it's all ready for you. Part 29. The apartment that wasn't there yesterday, in a crumbling brick complex on the edge of Cincinnati, where the freeway hums like a distant storm and the air always seems 2 degrees too cold for the season, there is an apartment that doesn't always exist. It is never vacant on rental records, but it is never leased. The front office doesn't list it. The mailboxes jump from 3B to 3D, and if you ask the building manager about 3C, he'll either look confused or irritated, like you're bringing up something best left buried. One tenant said she tried to deliver a package addressed to it once. When she found where it should have been, there was only a blank door, painted the same color as the hallway walls. No number, no peephole, no mail slot. She left the box at the base of the door and walked away. When she returned the next day, it was gone. She hadn't told anyone. That was the beginning of the story that spread quietly among the tenants. The story of the apartment that showed up when you were lonely enough to notice it. Not sad, not desperate, but hollowed. As though the space inside you became the key to finding the space inside the building. Everyone who claimed to have found it had one thing in common. Something in their life had gone numb. A recent loss. A long silence. A day that had slipped away without being lived. And on that day, when they turned the corner of the 3rd floor hallway, the blank space where 3C should be was no longer blank. A door was there, properly marked. Brass numbers slightly crooked. A worn doormat that looked like it had been stepped on too many times to count. Sometimes, faint light bled from beneath it, like someone had just stepped inside. And sometimes, the door was already open. One man, recently divorced and sleeping on a friend's couch in 3E, wandered the hall with a headache one night and noticed 3C's door ajar. He approached it without thinking, like you do with dreams before realizing you're inside one. He knocked once, then again, no answer. He pushed. The inside was nothing like the rest of the building. Instead of the dull beige carpet and sagging drywall, the interior of 3C was immaculate and cold. Black tile floor, perfectly flat. Bare walls painted a shade of grey that seemed to consume light. No furniture, no smell, no dust. Just a single chair in the center of the room, facing a television that wasn't plugged in. The screen was on anyway, glowing with static, but not ordinary static. There were faces in it, shifting too fast to follow, not flickering like TV interference, but pressing against the glass, their mouths moving in sync with no sound. When he leaned in close, he saw one of them was his own. Not from that day, but from childhood. Mouth moving in terrified silence, eyes wide like he'd just realized he wasn't going to wake up. The man left and never walked that floor again. Others have seen different things. One woman stepped inside and found herself in a copy of her childhood bedroom, perfect down to the scuff marks on the dresser. Except every item had one thing subtly wrong. Her favorite stuffed animal was the wrong color. Her lamp had a switch on the wrong side. The posters on the wall were written in symbols she didn't understand but somehow recognized. When she touched the bed, she felt warmth still clinging to the sheets, as if someone had just climbed out of it. The only mirror in the room showed her standing slightly off-center, with a second version of herself behind the reflection, one that smiled when she did not. She backed out without closing the door. It was gone when she looked back. There are stories, less frequent, more fragmented, of people who never came out. A teenager who lived in 2B went missing in 2003. The police filed a standard report. The family plastered photos around the city. But no one ever mentioned that, in the days leading up to his disappearance, neighbors had seen him staring up the stairwell at night, as if he was waiting for someone, or something. One neighbor said she found a notebook in the laundry room days later, with only 3 words written again and again across every page. Room remembers me. There is no record of a police search ever being conducted on the 3rd floor. When asked why, the officers on the case said there was no 3rd floor in that section of the building. The blueprints agree. The building itself is strange in its construction. Tenants have noted hallways that feel longer than they should be, windows that face brick walls that aren't there on the other side, doors that sometimes resist opening by half a second, as though something on the other side needed time to step back. But no matter what else changes, 3C doesn't stay consistent. Some nights it's there, some nights it's gone, sometimes it's just a blank space again. One tenant tried marking the wall where the door appeared with spray paint. It flaked off by morning, revealing smooth, untouched surface beneath. There's a theory among those who believe 3C isn't a room. It's a mirror, not of the building, but of you. That it manifests in response to something inside, the version of yourself you tried to forget, or the moment you almost ceased to exist without realizing it. A space between timelines, built from emotional residue and decisions not made. One version of your life leads down a hallway with no door. Another version opens it. Some claim that if you enter and stay long enough, the room will begin to speak. Not with sound, but with shape. It will show you something that makes no sense until years later, until a memory clicks into place, or a choice presents itself that feels familiar in the worst way. And when it does, you will understand that 3C didn't show you the future. It showed you the version of yourself that never left the room. And maybe, just maybe, you are the echo. If you ever find yourself in a building that feels wrong when it rains, and if you find yourself looking at an unnumbered door where there shouldn't be one, don't go in because you're curious. Go in only if you're ready to know what part of you the world forgot to bury. And remember, close the door behind you. Otherwise, it may stay open for someone else.
Part 30. The museum that opens after midnight. On the corner of a quiet intersection in the old industrial district of Detroit, surrounded by fenced-off warehouses and forgotten rail lines, there is a narrow building made of soot-stained limestone and iron-framed windows that haven't reflected daylight in decades. During the day, it looks derelict. Its nameplate is rusted over, the doors sealed with chains. Pedestrians pass by without a second glance, assuming it's condemned. Even the city's official zoning records list the address as inactive commercial, with no notes on ownership or purpose. But several times a year, always on nights when the moon is at its thinnest and the air hangs low with static, someone finds the doors unlocked. Those who have stepped inside never forget what they saw. The first public mention appeared in a 1996 Fringe publication, a small-run zine known for publishing rumors of urban oddities. A contributor who went by the pseudonym Argus claimed to have entered the building while walking home from a graveyard shift at the GM plant. According to his account, the doors swung open at his touch without resistance. The chains were intact, but when he looked back, they were gone. The air inside was cold but dry, tinged with the scent of lacquer and candle wax. The entrance hall was long and narrow, lit by gas sconces along the walls, each burning with a low bluish flame. At the far end, a placard hung beside a velvet rope. Its letters, etched in a material that shimmered like obsidian, read simply, "The Museum of Personal History." Argus described a sprawling interior far larger than the building should have allowed. Corridors split and doubled back on themselves. Galleries unfolded like dreams, and yet no layout made sense. Rooms appeared out of order. Time period displays next to unknown machinery. Victorian portraits adjacent to what looked like ancient biological specimens encased in crystal. Each room bore a small sign next to its entrance, labeled not by subject or error, but by emotion. Regret, curiosity, loss, desire, confession, unspoken. Argus claimed he entered a room labeled Consequence. Inside was a single exhibit, a display case, unlit, containing a cracked pair of glasses he instantly recognized as his father's, the ones he had thrown in anger when he was 16, shattering them during an argument. His father had died 2 days later of a heart attack. Argus said he hadn't thought of the glasses in years, but standing before them now, he couldn't breathe. The plaque beneath the glass was blank, but he swore he could hear something humming softly inside the case. Not mechanical, vocal, like the echo of a breath about to speak. When he left the room, the hallway had changed. The sconces were gone, the floor creaked now. He turned corners that hadn't been there before. When he finally reached the exit, the door led not to the street, but to the back of his apartment building, 5 miles away. He moved out the next morning. Most people dismissed the article as fiction, but others began to come forward, quietly, anonymously. They described the museum not as a place of learning but of remembering, not of shared history, but personal narrative, fragments of their own lives, preserved and displayed without permission. A woman in 2004 said she walked through a gallery filled with books that bore her handwriting on the spines. When she opened one, she found her own journal entries from childhood, entries she'd never written, but described events that did occur, exactly as remembered. At the end of each book was a page she didn't recognize, a future entry, always cut off mid-sentence. Another visitor described a chamber with no exhibits at all, just walls covered in names etched so small you had to lean in to read them. In the center of the room was a single black chair facing the far wall. He sat. The lights dimmed. A projector whirred to life, and on the wall he saw himself, but not as he was, as he could have been. Not a better version, not a worse one, just other. A life that branched from a single moment he barely remembered choosing. When the film ended, he tried to leave, but found the hallways no longer led the way they had. He followed the sound of ticking clocks until he found the exit. When he turned back, the door was a brick wall. It was never there again. Each visitor reports one final detail. At some point during their time inside, whether minutes or hours in, a figure appears. Never clearly, always at the edge of vision. Sometimes glimpsed through frosted glass, sometimes standing across a room in shadow. It never speaks, never approaches. It only watches. One person described it as wearing a museum docent's coat. Another said it was dressed in clothing from the same decade their father had died. A third saw only a silhouette with arms too long and a neck slightly bowed, like it was listening to something only it could hear. The museum, it seems, doesn't just catalogue what was. It listens for what wasn't. Choices not made, feelings not voiced, paths not taken. It collects not just your past, but the absences within it. That no one returns from. Of names found carved into the underside of benches. Of reflections in glass that don't quite match your movements.
One maintenance worker in 2012 claimed he found a basement under the adjacent warehouse, sealed off decades ago, filled with broken mannequins and display cases covered in dust. One still held a suit jacket, meticulously preserved. In the pocket was a note: "Your story is here. You left it unlocked." The warehouse burned down 2 weeks later. Arson was suspected. No suspects identified. If you ever find yourself walking a city block at an hour too late for reason and too early for memory, if you see a faint light through the windows of a building that shouldn't have power and the air smells faintly of candle smoke and lacquer, pause. You'll know the door is open if you hear a latch release softly as you pass. You'll know it's for you if the hallway echoes with the exact sound your childhood bedroom made when you closed the door for the last time. And if you enter, you may learn something you didn't realize you'd forgotten. Just be sure you know what kind of story you're part of, because once the museum has displayed you, you may never fully step outside its frame again. Part 31. The passenger in the fog in the low-lying plains of eastern Wyoming. There's a stretch of highway that doesn't appear unusual in daylight. It cuts clean through the land like a thin gray scar, lined with barbed wire and telephone poles that lean as if listening for something beneath the earth. Locals call it Old County 33, but the signage has been removed for decades. It's rarely used anymore, superseded by faster routes, better paved, better lit. Those who remember it speak of it only in passing, with a shake of the head or a slow breath before they change the subject. But every few years, always in the late autumn, when the morning frost begins to linger and the wind moves low across the grass like it's searching for warmth, someone finds themselves driving down that road without knowing why. And somewhere along the way, a passenger joins them. It doesn't begin with a sighting. There's no figure standing by the roadside, no call for help. It starts with the fog, dense, unnatural, creeping in from nowhere. The kind of fog that doesn't behave the way fog should. It moves against the wind. It thickens around the vehicle like a skin pulled tight, obscuring the road even beneath your headlights. The temperature drops. The dashboard lights seem dimmer, and for a while there's nothing but the sound of your own tires humming against the pavement and the distant thump of your own heart. Then something changes. You'll notice the weight first, not in the car, but in your chest, like the moment you realize you've forgotten something important. Not a physical item, something more essential. A memory, maybe, a feeling, and then when you glance into the rearview mirror, you'll see them, just barely. A shape, a silhouette in the back seat. They never speak first. Most who've encountered the passenger describe them the same way: a figure seated perfectly still in the center of the back seat, hands folded neatly in their lap, genderless, ageless, their features obscured by shadow, no matter how the light hits them. Some say they wear clothing that doesn't belong to this era. Old-fashioned coats, frayed collars, shoes that haven't been made in decades. One man described the passenger as dressed entirely in black, save for a red ribbon tied around one wrist, like a tether. If you try to look directly at them, you'll find your gaze sliding away, not through fear, through design. Your mind protects itself. You'll focus instead on the road, on your own hands, on the rhythm of your breathing. And still you'll know they're there.
Watching.
Waiting. Some drivers panic. They pull over, throw open the door, leap from the car into the fog, heart racing. And the moment their feet hit the ground, the fog is gone. The road is empty. The car is empty. And when they return home, they find things subtly out of place. A picture frame turned inward. A door they're sure they locked now hanging open. A voicemail on their phone with no message. Just the sound of distant breathing. Others keep driving. They describe the journey as both endless and short, the miles peeling away without memory. No landmarks, no turns, just the same strip of asphalt unfolding again and again. Time loses its grip. Minutes stretch, hours vanish. Some hear a voice, soft and level, whispering questions they don't remember answering. Others hear nothing at all, but feel their thoughts shift. Memories surfacing they haven't touched in years. Guilt, grief, regret, things they thought long buried suddenly fresh and tender again. The passenger is not cruel, not violent, but they are interested. And they are listening. What they want is never clear. Some say the passenger feeds on memory, draws it out like smoke from a fire, leaving behind only the ash of what once mattered. Others believe they are a test, a moment woven into the fabric of the road for those who are at a breaking point, a liminal checkpoint between continuing and vanishing. A few whisper that the passenger doesn't come to you but from you, that the figure in the back seat is a version of yourself you forgot you abandoned, the you that didn't survive something long ago. And now at last it's caught up. There is one detail that repeats in every account, though no one agrees on its meaning. As the fog begins to lift, and the road ahead begins to curve back toward familiarity, street signs you recognize, a gas station you've passed before, the passenger vanishes. You won't see them leave. One moment they are there, and the next, they are not. But in the seat where they sat you will find a single object, always something from your past. A trinket, a note, a photograph you thought you'd lost. One woman found a shoelace she remembered tying around her brother's wrist before he went missing at age 9. A man found a single page from a notebook he had burned in high school, his handwriting circled in red ink by someone else. A teenager found her childhood drawing of a house she'd never seen, until she passed it on the drive home. These are not messages, they are reminders. You do not leave the passenger behind. You carry them. Always have. Always will. If you ever find yourself on a road that doesn't quite match the map, and the fog begins to wrap around your car like a closing fist, you will know. You've been chosen, or perhaps you've finally reached the part of your journey where something old and silent steps forward to reclaim its seat. Do not ask them questions. Do not try to stop the car. Just drive. And listen.
Part 32. The man who only exists in photographs, in the city of Milwaukee, tucked between the sprawl of industrial streets and the river's slow curl around the old shipping district. There's a photography studio that hasn't accepted clients in over 40 years. The sign above the door reads Roth & Sons Portraiture, though no Roth has been listed in the phone book since the late 1970s. The building is still there, blinds drawn, door locked, windows smeared with time, but the mail never piles up, and the lights inside sometimes flicker on during storms. People pass it by without noticing. It's as if the building itself has trained them not to see it. But the photographs still turn up. They appear in antique shops, flea markets, and estate sales, always buried in boxes labeled miscellaneous, always on old matte finish paper with no markings on the back. The images are ordinary at first glance. Birthday parties from the 1950s, family reunions in grainy black and white, children standing stiffly beside bicycles, couples in modest suits and dresses, posed against patterned wallpaper. But somewhere in the background, in every single photograph, there he is. A man, not always in focus, not always full body. Sometimes he's behind a curtain, sometimes reflected in glass, sometimes crouched in a group shot, where no one else seems to notice him. But once you start seeing him, you can't unsee him. The same high cheekbones, the same slicked back hair, the same expression unreadable, eyes just slightly too wide, mouth neither smiling nor closed, like someone caught between words. There is no record of this man, no known name, no fingerprint, census entry, or trace of his existence beyond these captured moments. Collectors refer to him simply as the extra, and his presence is an obsession among a small but growing circle of researchers, archivists, and amateur investigators. The earliest known photo featuring him dates back to 1932, a Milwaukee church congregation, standing in winter coats on the steps of St. Aloysius. There, just behind the priest's shoulder, stands a man who doesn't match the era's style. His jacket is too modern, his posture too stiff. His eyes look directly into the camera when no one else is. Since then, he has been found in more than 80 separate images, ranging from street fairs in 1940 to a child's birthday party in 1976 to a group of factory workers posing in 1959. Always in the background, always out of place, and in every photo he looks slightly older, not significantly, but enough that laid out in sequence, his aging is consistent, as though time passes for him too, just differently. One man, a former archivist at the Milwaukee Historical Society, became consumed with tracing the extra. He spent over a decade collecting images, comparing negatives, and cross-referencing timelines. He noted something chilling. In every photo where the extra appeared,
Something had gone wrong shortly after it was taken. A house fire, a fatal illness, a missing person. Not always immediate, but always eventual. It was as though the photograph marked an intersection, where something benign split, quietly, into something else. The archivist disappeared in 2012. The last thing he uploaded to the online forum he helped found was a digitally enhanced scan of a 1963 class portrait, where the extra could be seen in the doorway, holding a camera. The caption read, "He's not just watching anymore." Some theorize the extra is a ghost. Others believe he's a time traveler, moving through history without fully belonging to it. One woman, an elderly photo restoration artist, claimed she had a dream where she saw the man not in photographs, but in person, standing at the foot of her bed as old photos fell like snowflakes from the ceiling, each one landing face up, each one containing someone she had lost. She awoke with dry tears on her cheeks, and the sensation that a flashbulb had gone off in the room. There are stranger claims too. A man in Ohio said he tore one of the photos up, only to find the pieces rearranged themselves in his desk drawer days later. A teenager in Illinois found a Polaroid tucked into a library book. She had never seen the people in the picture before, except for the figure in the back who stood beside her locker every day that week, unmoving, never speaking. A couple in upstate New York bought a photo at a garage sale and hung it on their wall. Weeks later, the wife began forgetting her own face in the mirror. She said it was like her reflection belonged to someone else. When they removed the photo, the reflection returned, but the man in the photo, the extra, was no longer in it. No one knows how the photos continue to appear. The Roth studio has been sealed for decades. The front door won't open, even when broken into. Those who've tried claim the doorknob is warm to the touch, and the glass refuses to shatter. One urban explorer left a tape recorder outside the building overnight. The next morning, he found it running, with 3 hours of faint clicks and distant footsteps. At the end of the tape, a man's voice whispered a single sentence in perfect clarity. "You already posed. You just haven't seen the picture yet." He never returned to the studio. There are rumors that if you find too many of the photographs, if you collect them, study them, try to map them, the man begins to appear more clearly. At first in the periphery of mirrors, then in the backgrounds of photos you take yourself. Not just in antique snapshots, but on your phone. In reflections. In security footage. And finally, in person. Always behind you. Always watching. So if you ever find an old photograph at the bottom of a dusty bin, if the scene seems strangely quiet, and the background contains a shape that feels familiar but wrong, don't bring it home. Don't scan it. Don't pin it to your wall, because once the extra appears, he never disappears. And long after the photo fades, you may find yourself alone. Except for the sound of a shutter clicking in the dark. Part 33. The hotel that vanishes before checkout. At the southern edge of the Sierra Nevada, tucked between winding backroads and dry foothill brush, there's a motel that appears only under certain conditions. It doesn't advertise. It doesn't show up on GPS. It never has more than one car parked outside, and yet people have stayed there. The building is small, only 7 rooms, lined in a single row facing an empty lot with cracked pavement. There's a rusted ice machine that hums despite not being plugged in, and a flickering neon sign that reads vacancy in dull orange letters, even during the day. The name above the office door is the Larkspur Inn, but no one has been able to trace a business license, phone number, or tax ID. The font is outdated, the paint chipped, but if you're driving alone, and you're tired enough, physically, emotionally, spiritually, you may see it glowing on the roadside like it's been waiting for you. No one remembers pulling in. That's the first sign. They always say the same thing. I don't remember making the turn. One moment they're driving down an unfamiliar stretch of highway, heavy-eyed and low on gas. The next, the headlights catch the flicker of neon, and there it is, the inn. Quiet and inviting, like a relic preserved in stillness. The parking lot is always empty except for a single spot near the end, with an old, dust-covered station wagon that looks like it hasn't moved in decades. No license plate, no windows intact, just a suggestion that someone was once there and then wasn't. Inside the office, a bell rings when you enter. though the air is still and thick. There's no clerk, no cameras, no posted rates. Just a small wooden box on the counter filled with brass keys, each marked with a room number and nothing else. Visitors report choosing a key without knowing why. The one they pick always feels slightly warm, like it was held just before they arrived. Room 3 is most common. When you open the door, the room is clean. That's what everyone remembers first. Not pristine or modern, no, nothing that artificial, but clean in the way that feels prepared. A bed that looks slept in and remade. A mirror without dust but with water spots, like it had been wiped too quickly. A small notepad by the lamp with one corner torn off. The television only plays static. The Bible in the nightstand is in a language no one recognizes. The bathroom has no lock, and the window doesn't show the outside. That's not a metaphor. Every person who's stayed in room 3, and there are now at least 15 known survivors, has said the same thing. The curtains look ordinary, faded polyester with a sun-warped pattern of leaves. But when you pull them aside, the window reveals something else entirely. Not the parking lot, not the night, but a hallway, dimly lit with peeling wallpaper and picture frames that seem to shift depending on how long you look at them. Sometimes the hallway is empty, sometimes someone is standing in it, still, silent, watching the window from the other side. When that happens, the lights in the room buzz louder and the mirror fogs without heat. One woman, a nurse traveling cross-country, said she saw herself in the hallway, dressed in hospital scrubs she hadn't worn in 10 years, covered in ash. Another man, a traveling salesman, reported seeing a version of his father who had died when he was young. But in the hallway, the man was older, taller, and when he reached toward the glass, the salesman felt a hand press against his back in the room. No one sleeps well at the Larkspur Inn. The dreams are vivid, detailed, and carry over into waking life. People report remembering moments that never happened, entire relationships, childhood events, alternate jobs or tragedies. Some write them down, some wake up weeping. One visitor claimed he dreamed of a daughter he never had. He woke up with a photograph of her on the nightstand. When he returned home, his wife asked who left the drawing on their fridge. A child's drawing, crayon, signed in handwriting they didn't recognize. Checkout is never formal. There's no front desk interaction, no final bill. People simply wake up and feel that it's time to leave. The sun is always bright when they step outside, even if it was night before. The sky always cloudless, but the world seems off, slightly muted, colors dimmer, roads unfamiliar, cell service gone until the next town. And when they check the rearview mirror, the motel is no longer there, just an empty lot filled with tall grass and old tire tracks that don't match their own. Attempts to return always fail. People have tried marking the road, dropping pins, following route numbers. Nothing works. The terrain shifts. The mile markers don't align. Locals claim the area has too many ghost exits, stretches of road that loop unexpectedly, places where compasses stop pointing north. A few have camped nearby, hoping to catch the motel reappearing. One man stayed for 7 nights, documenting every hour. On the final night, his tent was found torn open, his equipment scattered. No blood, no footprints, just a single key in the dirt. Room 3. He was found 2 months later, 5 towns over, barefoot and unshaven, muttering the same phrase. She didn't want to go alone. No one knows what the Larkspur Inn truly is. A haunt, a fold in time, a moment of rest granted to those nearing some unseen edge. All the stories agree on one thing: the motel gives you something. Not what you want, not what you need, but something you once forgot mattered. A memory, a warning, a glimpse of the life you left behind, or the life still waiting ahead in some version of you that never looked away. If you see the sign, if you ever feel your headlights catch a flicker of that word vacancy just as your eyes begin to blur from fatigue, think carefully before you stop. You may find answers, but they never come free. And once you've held the key, part of you may never leave that room again.
Part 34. The broadcast that shouldn't exist. In the early 2000s, a low-power radio station operating in northern Utah went off the air permanently due to funding issues. It had been a small public access network, mostly run by students from the local community college. The call sign was KBRX, and for a few years it broadcast weather updates, folk music, late-night paranormal talk shows, and the kind of awkward student-run programming that only aired after midnight. By 2004, the studio was shut down. The tower was dismantled, the license expired. The airwaves were reassigned, but people still hear it. Not all the time, not even in the same place. But if you're driving through the desert between midnight and 3 a.m. with no other cars in sight, and you're between towns, between names, between cell towers, between memories, you might turn the dial and catch a fragment. Not a full program, just a sliver, a voice, a tone, a piece of music you recognize but can't name. Some have reported hearing the sound of water dripping, followed by a child humming a lullaby that cuts off suddenly, like a breath pulled too tight. Others claim they hear news reports that don't match any known timeline, events that haven't happened, dates that don't align, cities with names that have never existed. The signal has no frequency label. It fades if you try to record it. It only broadcasts when you're alone, and once you hear it, it becomes harder to forget. It's known by those who study it, quietly, obsessively, as the signal from nowhere. The first public report came from a long-haul trucker named Devin Mullery in 2005. He was driving eastbound through Utah on Route 191, just past Green River, when his radio lost reception and was overtaken by soft static. He flipped stations, but none of them came through. Then, very clearly, he heard someone speaking in a calm male voice. "Welcome back. The sky tonight is especially empty, and we are glad you stayed." No music, no static, just the voice, smooth and certain, as if the man had been waiting for someone to tune in. Mullery listened for 5 minutes as the voice read what he later described as a list of lost things, items, dates, names, wallet, red leather, Route 8, August 1971. Miriam Joy Selden, last seen behind the grain silo. One white tennis shoe, left foot only. A question, never asked. A boy who vanished in a thunderstorm, then silence. The signal dropped. Normal radio returned. Mullery didn't tell anyone until a year later, when he met another driver who described a nearly identical experience, different content, same voice, same time of night, same part of the desert. That's when they started keeping records. Over the years, a loose network of signal chasers has developed, anonymous individuals who collect sightings, compare notes, and attempt to triangulate the origin of the broadcast. They've catalogued over 200 known encounters. Patterns have emerged. First, the broadcasts only occur in transitional zones, desert highways, mountain passes, empty farmland, places where the landscape is vast and unbroken. People describe a sensation of detachment while listening, like they're drifting slightly behind the moment, watching themselves from just over their shoulder. Second, the content varies wildly, but always centers on the almost forgotten, memories that live just below the surface of consciousness. Many listeners say the broadcast triggers something they had long buried, a scent, a name, a fear, an old photograph they haven't seen in decades. One woman, a librarian from Idaho, claimed she heard her grandmother's voice reading from a diary she thought had been burned. Another man said the broadcast repeated a dream he'd had as a child, word for word, before playing a song that had only ever existed in that dream. Third, if you listen too long, the voice changes. It starts subtle, the cadence slows, the tone softens, the vocabulary becomes strangely intimate. It begins to use your name, mentions your hometown, refers to things you've never told anyone. Some believe the signal isn't just a relic. It's aware, it doesn't play the past. It reaches into it, pulls from your personal history, rearranges it, shows you what you've tried not to see. A retired radio technician once claimed the broadcast used a modulation pattern not consistent with any licensed transmitter. He said the waveform, when visualized, resembled not a signal, but a fingerprint. He died before he could publish his findings. His laptop was found wiped, the hard drive magnetized to the point of total corruption. He was the fifth documented death tied to a deep analysis of the signal, There's a story that if you follow the transmission, if you drive long enough, night after night, tuning the dial in perfect silence, you'll eventually find the source. Not a tower, not a transmitter, but a roadside rest stop with no signage, half buried in the dirt. There will be a vending machine with no lights and a bathroom with no mirror. The doors will be unlocked, the lights will hum, and inside, sitting at the reception desk, will be a man in a grey suit, holding a microphone. He won't look up. He'll already be speaking, and the words you'll hear won't come from his mouth. They'll come from the radio in your hand, and it will be your own voice reading a list of things you've lost, one by one, even the things you haven't lost yet. People have tried to disprove it. They say it's an urban legend born of road weariness, of late-night loneliness, of static-fed dreams. But if that's true, why do so many strangers hear the same phrases? Why do they draw the same maps? Why does the same melody keep reappearing across tapes from unrelated decades, even when it matches no known recording? Some say the signal is a bleed-through from another version of reality. Others believe it's a message meant for someone who still hasn't heard it. And some fear that it's a lure, that the more people who listen, the more complete it becomes, like a puzzle rebuilding itself, one voice at a time. So if you find yourself driving alone at night, between cities, between names, and your radio begins to hiss and crackle, listen closely, just for a moment, but not too long, because if you listen long enough, the voice might stop being a stranger, and it might start sounding like you. Part 35. The room that waits underground. In the basement of an abandoned textile mill near Asheville, North Carolina, there is a room that doesn't appear on any blueprint. The building itself is well known among urban explorers. 5 floors of decaying machinery, moss-covered concrete, rusted spindles, and fractured glass. It's a place where time collapsed and never rebuilt itself. Locals have long dismissed it as just another dead factory among dozens scattered across the region, swallowed by vines and history. But beneath it, 3 levels down, past the broken freight elevator shaft and behind a steel door without hinges, there is something that should not be there. A chamber, perfectly square, perfectly silent, and it has no entrance, unless it decides you need to be there. The first mention of it came from a structural engineer named Alistair Wynne, who was hired in 1998 to evaluate the building for possible renovation. He was thorough, known for triple-checking schematics, walking every level with measured steps. But his notes, retrieved after he went missing, tell a different story. He wrote that on the second day, while mapping foundation stress points, he found a door in the sub-basement that did not exist on any version of the plans. It was set into a concrete wall, perfectly flush, and framed in a black metal he couldn't identify. No handle, no hinges, just a vertical seam, so narrow you'd miss it unless you were standing directly in front of it. He took photos, none developed. He tried to measure it. Every tape returned a different length. Then on the third day, the door was open. There was no sound when it moved, no scrape, no groan, just a subtle shift in air pressure, like a cave exhaling. The room inside was dark, but the darkness wasn't complete. It shimmered faintly at the edges, like something was moving just beyond perception. Wynne entered. He left his phone behind. They found it lying screen up, camera open, battery drained to 0. He never came back out. Search crews combed the entire lower floor. The wall was solid, no door, no seam, nothing. But 3 months later, one of the rescue volunteers received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a Polaroid photo, slightly warped from heat, showing a square room with smooth concrete walls and a single wooden chair in the center. And sitting in that chair, head down, arms slack, was a man in work boots and a yellow vest, just like Wynne had been wearing. The man was not looking at the camera, but in the reflection on the back wall barely visible. He was smiling. The letter was signed with a typed message. The room knows when you're ready. Since then the stories have spread. Quietly, almost superstitiously, urban explorers report flashes of vertigo while walking the lower levels, as if the world has briefly rotated. Others have found their cameras filled with photos they didn't take. Blurry images of grey walls, close-ups of corners, glimpses of wooden furniture in impossible spaces. One man claims he was exploring alone when his flashlight flickered, and in that moment of darkness, he saw a doorway 10 feet ahead. When the light returned, it was gone, but the floor was covered in footprints, none of them his. Then there's the sound. Some call it a hum, others describe it as a throb, or a pulse, low and resonant,
like something enormous stirring beneath the concrete. It happens only when you stand still. It builds the longer you remain in one place, and if you close your eyes while it's happening, you will see a room. Not always the same room. Not exactly. Some see wallpaper, some see stone, some see a room identical to one from their childhood, or a memory they forgot they had. But always at the center is a chair, and always it is facing away. What happens if you sit in it? That's the question no one wants to answer. There are those who believe the room is not part of our world, that it's a fault in reality, a dead space created by the weight of forgotten time, a place where the unconscious self waits, patient and silent, until the rest of you finds it. Some say it's a trap, built by something not human, not malevolent, but curious, a place that doesn't feed on blood or pain, but memory, identity, selfhood, a place where the version of you that you almost were is still waiting to be chosen. And there are others who believe the room isn't a place at all, that it's a moment, a single precise point in your life, delayed, displaced, unexperienced, a splinter of decision that was never acted on, and when you encounter it, it manifests physically, dragging you into the shape of what you never became. It shows you not what you want, not what you fear, but what you refuse to become. And once it shows you, it keeps you, not your body, your place. People who return from the mill, those who come close enough to feel the room press against the walls of their mind, report dreams that linger. Dreams of being watched not by something but someone familiar. A face in a window, a voice in a mirror, a presence behind them in photographs they don't remember posing for. They describe walking into rooms they know intimately, only to feel that the dimensions have shifted, that a door used to be there, that a chair was meant to be in that corner, that someone was just sitting there, but now the seat is empty and warm. They say the room doesn't need a location, it just needs an opening, a moment when your defenses falter, when you are hollow, uncertain, unanchored, and then it arrives, concrete or carpet, light or dark, but always the chair, always the stillness, and something in the air that smells like dust and rain on old wood. So if you ever find yourself exploring forgotten places, or walking halls that feel longer than they should, and you come across a door that doesn't belong, don't open it, because you're curious. Open it only if you're certain, because once the room recognizes you, it won't forget, and neither will you.